Five Nights at Freddy's has a lot of books. The original novel trilogy, the Fazbear Fright series of short stories, Tales from the Pizzaplex, interactive novels, and seemingly endless editions of ultimate guides and character encyclopedias. Being a dedicated fan of the series and staying up to date with the lore unfortunately means reading a full college course workload worth of FNAF literature. Thankfully, you clicked on this video, which means you're about to get a full breakdown of the FNAF books, starting all the way at the beginning with the Silver Eyes novel trilogy. No reading required. But instead of analyzing the original novels, we're going to be taking a look at their visual adaptations, the graphic novels. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we break down the story, themes, characters, artwork, and lore of the Five Nights at Freddy's graphic novels. Five Nights at Freddy's The Silver Eyes, the graphic novel, is the graphic novel adaptation of the first Five Nights at Freddy's novel, The Silver Eyes, and it was published in 2019. It was written by Scott Cawthon and Kira Breed-Wrisley, and adapted and illustrated by Claudia Schröder, with colors by Laurie Smith. Before we get into the story, I want to go over my first impressions of the artwork. Since in a graphic novel, it's the first thing you see and an incredibly important element of the book. The entire story is being told visually. If it doesn't look good, it won't be a good read no matter the quality of the writing. The art of the Silver Eyes is not good. The human characters are unfortunately pretty ugly. They have slightly unsettling body proportions, like their hands and heads are too big, their necks are weirdly elongated, and their eyes are all very flat and lifeless. They also don't have anything interesting going on with their outfits or their hair or anything like that. They're all very plain looking. There's only one human character whose design I like, but we'll get to them later. The animatronics look alright. They just kind of look how they do in the games. Nothing too offensive, but nothing to write home about either. The worst problem though is the backgrounds, mainly because there are barely any. Tons and tons of panels just have solid color gradients or literally just no backgrounds at all, and a lot of pages look like they're unfinished or were rushed through. In panels that do have backgrounds, there's a lot of weird issues with depth and proportion. The scenes look very flat, and you never get a good sense of space in the environments that the characters are in. On top of that, the comic formatting is very bland and unimaginative. You barely get any full-page illustrations and almost no creative layout of the panels on any of the pages. All of the speech bubbles are rectangular, which is super weird and unusual for comics. It doesn't really affect readability, but it's just odd. Also, there's not too many fun-looking sound effects, which this story really is asking for. The poor illustration of this book is a shame because a graphic novel adaptation should take advantage of the visual medium to bring the story to life. The medium of the original Silver Eyes book is a novel, which means that it relies on written words to tell the story in the reader's mind. The medium of the graphic novel relies primarily on images to tell the story visually, and the best graphic novels are ones that take advantage of that opportunity to revel in the artwork. There are so many ways to do this across the entire spectrum of artistic styles. Detailed, rich backgrounds, dynamic choreography, creative paneling, visually appealing character design, and so much more. But The Silver Eyes is lacking pretty much all of that, which means that it's not a successful adaptation to the visual medium, which means that no matter how good or bad the story is, it is a mid-graphic novel at best. However, that's all just my opinion as someone who has read their fair share of comics and graphic novels. As we read this book, I want you to look at the artwork yourself and think about whether you like it or not, what works for you and what doesn't. Because regardless of whether you like or dislike a piece of media, the most important thing is to understand why you feel that way. With that out of the way, let's read The Silver Eyes. The story begins with Charlie, a teenage girl who's returning to her hometown after 10 years to reunite with her childhood friends. But before the first chapter, we actually get a few pages that flash forward to a later moment in the story, where Charlie is hiding behind some arcade cabinets from Foxy. She thinks to herself,
I have to get out. I have to.
Since this is the very first thing we read in the book, it's probably being put here to build tension, because for the rest of the time we're reading, we'll know that this spooky hide-and-seek sequence is coming. But this line is also important because we're going to be seeing a recurring motif throughout all 3 books of Charlie wanting to get out or escape from different places. So keep that in mind as we go. Chapter 1. Charlie's arriving in her hometown of Hurricane, Utah, and decides to visit her childhood home, which seems to just be empty. Like, is someone living there now, or is it just abandoned? It's kind of weird. She goes to her bedroom and presses a button on her bed frame that summons a doll from a very small closet, who she calls Ella. We see a flashback of her showing these closets to someone called John in her childhood, and John asks why she has 3 of them. I wonder if there's a 4th one somewhere. She also flashes back to her dad working in a garage or basement while she plays on the floor. It's safe to assume that not only is her dad gone, but he was fairly neglectful of her as a child, the kind of dad archetype who's maybe obsessed with his work. She pulls up to the Hurricane Diner, which has probably the most boring logo I've ever seen. And this is where we get introduced to the other main characters in the story: Carlton, Jessica, and John. And it's on this page where we get the first instance of an effective use of the visual medium. We get to see each character paired up with their younger selves, how Charlie last saw them versus how she's seeing them now. From just these panels alone, we learn so much about each of these characters before we even hear them speak. Carlton seemed to get into a lot of trouble as a kid, and he seems to be kind of a smug or aloof teenager now. Jessica was a stereotypical girly girl, and now she's giving major popular rich girl vibes. And John was especially friendly towards Charlie when they were kids, and from the look he's giving her now, I'm guessing that's still going to be the case. This single page has given us so much strong characterization before the dialogue even starts, and I love it. Charlie sits down and they sort of start catching up, but they don't really get too deep into where each of them has been living and what their lives are like. We just learn that Jessica lives in New York and Carlton still lives in Hurricane. They mention 2 other characters who are on their way, Lamar and Marla, who's bringing her little brother Jason. I really like this baby. So far, the dialogue in this scene is fine. Carlton and Jessica both seem to just kind of be caricatures of a dumb jock and a valley girl, respectively. Carlton wants to leave Hurricane, and Jessica likes talking about herself. The first time John says anything, it's literally just to talk about why they're here and advance the plot. They're here for a scholarship announcement to honor the memory of Michael Brooks, a child who went missing at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza 10 years ago. It seems like they all knew him to some extent, but Carlton was especially close with him. Despite that, he hasn't really visited his parents since he disappeared, and he's not sure why they've stayed in Hurricane all these years. Carlton may not be a very empathetic person, maybe not for a lack of trying, but maybe he's just not very good at dealing with tough emotions. In contrast, Charlie is strongly empathizing with Michael's parents as she thinks about the incident, and she understands exactly why they haven't moved away.
His body has never been found. How could they not have secretly hoped he might come home, no matter how impossible it was? How could they leave the only home Michael knew?
Charlie is an empathetic person, but she also seems to be a very sad person, or at least an emotionally troubled one. We don't know much about her yet, but I like her so far. She's an interesting protagonist to follow. They ask Carlton what happened to Freddy's, and he says it's been built over. This is too much for Charlie, and she excuses herself to panic in the parking lot. Freddy's is apparently a touchy subject for her, not just because of what happened to Michael. It seems like there's something more going on here. John, being the absolute gentleman that he is, comes outside to comfort her, and we get another piece of excellent visual storytelling. As Charlie tells John that she's not used to dealing with her Freddy's trauma head-on and usually avoids the subject, they both look at a plane flying overhead, which serves as a cool symbol for Charlie's predicament. The town of Hurricane is the home of her trauma, and most of the time she's like the plane, just flying over it and not paying it any mind. But now she's on the ground, and she can't avoid it. The other 2 come outside and they talk more about Freddy's. We learn that they got to spend a lot of time there as kids because Charlie's father is the owner, and that they all really loved it there. Jessica used to complain to Bonnie about her parents, and Carlton remarks that he remembers Freddy's more than anything else in his childhood. For both of them, it was in a certain way more of a home than their actual homes. John weirdly says that Freddy was the most relatable, but doesn't elaborate, which I find really funny. Charlie's memory is more fragmented, but she does remember hugging Golden Freddy, which is very spooky because the others only remember regular Brown Freddy. Charlie laughs it off, but is still unsettled. John suggests that they go to the abandoned Freddy's, and Charlie is on board with it. Chapter 2. The gang arrives at Freddy's to find a giant abandoned mall that has been built around it, which is weird. We now get some internal dialogue from Charlie that is extremely important for her character going forward.
The idea that this place could really be gone, sometimes I just want to scrub it from my mind, as if it had never been. But now that somebody else has scrubbed it from the landscape, it feels wrong, like it should have been up to me.
So she's not upset that Freddy's is gone, she's upset that she didn't have any control over whether it got demolished or not. She was never granted the autonomy to make a decision about how she wanted to deal with something in her life, and she wishes that she had the ability to make that choice. This lines up with her motif of being trapped and wanting to escape, because if important decisions about your life are being made by other people, then you're somewhat of a prisoner within your own life. You don't have freedom, which is being established as the motivating force behind Charlie's character development. We'll keep this in mind as we read. They make it through the mall and see a night guard in the shadows along the way, and they wonder why an abandoned building needs a night guard. They eventually get to the abandoned Freddy's and start running around, having lots of youthful fun. When they leave, Charlie remarks that they're all just like how they were as kids. Even though this is a scene where the characters are just hanging out and being teenagers and reclaiming their youth together, it doesn't feel fun. None of them have especially interesting interpersonal dynamics. None of their interactions are particularly fun or endearing. There's just almost no chemistry between them. They just kind of generically react to stuff around them in the way that you've come to expect them to. I know I've already mentioned it once on this channel, but it's an easy FNAF adjacent comparison to make. Think about how entertaining the Losers Club are when they're together. Their strong personalities play off of each other in a way that's fun to watch, and makes you want to keep following their adventure. That's the type of dynamic the Silver Eyes group should have as teens in a horror mystery type story, but instead they're just boring. They leave and Charlie has another flashback to her dad, where someone asks, "Does it hurt?" and we see a creepy looking endoskeleton looming above them. I actually like this little flashback quite a bit. It's very eerie and the endoskeleton's glazed over human-like eyes are haunting. This is the first part of the book I would actually call mildly scary. Chapter 3. Marla and Jason have arrived. We don't get much from them right off the bat except for Jason being your average annoying little brother and Marla seeming generally nice. They meet up with John, Carlton, and Lamar at the diner and it's super awkward. It's definitely supposed to be awkward unlike a lot of the earlier dialogue, but I'm not sure if it's awkward because they're about to go to the Michael event or if it's just because they don't know Lamar and Marla as well as they know each other. They go to the Michael scholarship event and watch his mom give a very sad speech. She remarks that their being there is indicative of Michael's legacy, which is true on multiple levels. They remember his friendship to this day, but his true legacy is his disappearance, sadly. She also briefly mentions other kids going missing around the same time, and as fans of the games, we should know that she's talking about the missing children incident, where the disappearances of 5 children were linked to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Charlie says that she needs some fresh air and leaves the building, which is another instance of her being trapped and wanting to escape. Once again, she's running from the trauma of Freddy's that surrounds her. The group ends up in the parking lot where they tell Marla and Lamar about Freddy's. They're obviously interested and want to see it too, so they decide to go there again that night. Carlton thinks it's weird to go to Freddy's today because it would be disrespectful to Michael, but Charlie disagrees and says it would actually be almost a way of honoring what happened. It's not really clear yet why she wants to go back to Freddy's so badly that she'd make up an excuse like that. It's either because she wants to find out more about what happened to Michael or because she wants to get closure about her lacking the choice to move on from Freddy's or not. At this point, everyone seems to want to go to Freddy's to just frolic around and have a good time, rather than solve a mystery or find some kind of closure. Charlie decides to go visit her old house again, and John tags along with her because he's a simp. Also, I'm going to be calling John a simp sometimes, and I just want to clarify that I'm not using it in like the weird incel way to put him down for being submissive or any weird BS like that. I say it as a term of endearment. He tells her that he remembers seeing a yellow bear mascot standing next to Michael right before he disappeared, and he especially remembers its eyes. The eyes, they were all I could see. I remember them like they're right in front of me. They were dead, just dull and flat. We get a good look at those eyes in this flashback, large with gray or silver irises, unlike the rest of the characters who have no irises at all. We should be on the lookout for the next time these eyes appear. Since we've played the games, we know that these eyes belong to William Afton, the child murderer of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. What's interesting though is that the games tell us that he used the spring Bonnie suit, and spoiler alert, but we see him use it again later in this book, but here he's using the golden Freddy suit. This is the only instance in the entire series that we ever see him doing this, and it's when he's kidnapping Michael Brooks. We also see that he's doing this while everyone is distracted by the animatronics malfunctioning on stage, and this whole scenario is screaming FNAF 2 to me.
Someone used one of the suits. We had a spare in the back, a yellow one. Someone used it. Now none of them are acting right.
When FNAF 2 came out, there was no Spring Bonnie yet, and since the only yellow suit we knew about was Golden Freddy, everyone naturally assumed that Purple Guy was using it to murder kids, which caused the animatronics to start tweaking when they saw it again. That seems to be exactly what's happening here, but we'll see later that it's just the killer's presence that makes them go haywire, not the yellow suit. So it's weird. Chapter 4. They go back to Freddy's, this time with Marla, Lamar, and Jason, and they discover a control terminal beneath the stage where they can control the animatronics, which they learn to be a very difficult and complicated task. This is kind of weird because in all of the games, the animatronics are implied to be able to move around on their own, both on and off stage. I actually looked it up to see if this is common in real life places like Chuck E. Cheese, but no. It turns out those animatronics are pre-programmed to perform sequences of movements synced up to audio. So I don't really know why this control terminal is a thing. Charlie once again feels uncomfortable in a confined space and wants to get out. They run around some more, and Jason passes some kids' drawings on the wall. For the most part, they resemble the kinds of drawings you see in the games, with kids playing with the characters, and of course, the ominous yellow rabbit. And is that, oh no, it can't be. Guys, why is Psychic Friend Fredbear here? And why is there a lone house in a clearing? And why is there a flower from the girls' room in FNAF 4? So this either implies that Bite Victim is canon to the Silver Eyes and has been to a Freddy's location, or that Claudia Schröder was just grabbing visuals from different FNAF games and making them into kids' drawings. Since I don't want to think about the implications of Bite Victim being in this continuity, I'm gonna assume that it's the latter and briskly move on. I really like this next set of panels that pair up Jason looking at this creepy haunted drawing with the rest of them just screwing around and acting like idiots. It really builds tension because the people who are supposed to be the adults in the room are playing around like children, while the actual child is the only one paying attention and getting scared in the process. Unfortunately, this great tension is killed literally on the next page because Charlie gets hurt by Foxy and they all just teleport back to the motel instantly. It really sucks because when you see the next time they go to Freddy's, you'll see that there's literally no reason why those events couldn't have just happened on the same night. You'd think that it's so they can have 5 nights at Freddy's, ha ha ha, but no, they don't actually do that. So they're just stretching it out to fill pages, I guess. Chapter 5. Charlie gets woken up by the phrase, "Does it hurt?" again, and she goes outside to watch the sunrise. Of course, John doesn't miss the opportunity to hang out with her more. They literally joke about Charlie stepping on him, which he was completely fine with, which is hilarious. They sit together awkwardly for a moment, and then Charlie gives a completely unprompted exposition dump about Fredbear's family diner. She tells John how the diner was before Freddy's, and that it featured a yellow bear and rabbit, which were spring-lock suits, meaning they could be worn by performers and function as robots separately. She explains it, but it's all stuff we know from the games. She also tells him about her twin brother, Sammy, and that before her mom left, left, they spent a lot of time together as a family. They decide to go look for it, and of course they find it by just aimlessly driving around the town. I like this lizard. They explore the building a bit, and when Charlie finds a closet with costumes in it, she has a flashback and learns that Sammy was kidnapped by a man wearing a yellow rabbit suit. We can see that his eyes are the same ones that we see in the Fredbear suit in John's flashback to when Michael was taken. Also, this flashback never shows Sammy being physically taken away, so it's very much implied that he could have taken either of them. I wonder if that's important. Charlie and John think Sammy and Michael's disappearances must be connected since they both involved yellow suits, and they start heading back into town to meet the others. Charlie drops one of my favorite lines in the whole series.
Lightning strikes twice, but not murder.
Chapter 6. It's nighttime now, and they're all back at Freddy's again. Everyone's joking about how Charlie and John were out by themselves, tee-hee-hee, and then we get my favorite character and overall my favorite part of this book, Dave, the creepy security guard of the abandoned mall. Right away, we can see that he's not only slaying in this panel, but he's sporting the same silver gray eyes as the killer from the flashbacks. So before anything else, we the reader know that this is the murderer. I love Dave in this book, and he might actually be my personal favorite depiction of William Afton in the entire series. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but just hear me out. First, unlike all the other characters, I actually like his design. The weird and uncanny style that they're drawn in actually suits him because he's supposed to look creepy and off-putting. I especially like the way his eyes bulge and his mouth kind of stretches outside the bounds of his face. He looks like a Rick and Morty character, and again, I think the weird vibe just really suits him. Outside of his design, I really love how he interacts with the story and the other characters, but we'll get more into that later in this scene. So Dave tells the gang that he could get them in trouble for trespassing, but Charlie asks him if he just wants to accompany them instead so they can still explore. He agrees, and as they're walking into Freddy's, Lamar asks him what happened to Freddy's in the mall, because Lamar needed something to do in the story after doing pretty much nothing for over half the book. Dave tells them that after Freddy's closed, nobody wanted to lease the property due to the kids going missing, so someone sealed it up and built a mall around it. But the mall was abandoned partway through construction because, as Dave describes it, Freddy's aura and mystical energy spilled out into the rest of the building and spooked all of the business owners. Dave is talking about agony, which is a supernatural force in the Five Nights at Freddy's universe that we learn about in the Fazbear Fright series. It's basically a dark energy that gets created by extreme levels of pain and anguish and lingers in that physical place, whether that be a building or object, indefinitely. It's a common trope of ghost stories, just with a different name. Dave implies that he does believe that agony is a real power rather than just spiritual hokum, which is very important for his character. He's someone who has a connection to the paranormal forces and forbidden knowledge. Lamar and the reader at this point just think he's a crank, but we learn later on that these things are very much real. As he's explaining, Charlie notices some strange pink markings on the back of his neck, which creeps her out even more. John tells her that he's just a guard and there's nothing to worry about. I really like how in this panel here, Dave is completely in shadow except for his eyes, which are fixated directly on Charlie. Man, it would be nice if there was a cool background to go along with this too, to make the panel actually feel complete. Dave helps them make the animatronics dance on stage with the control panel. I love how smug he looks here while he's showing off his elite hacking skills. He looks like the Jarvis meme. This makes Charlie even more skeptical of him, because how would a security guard know how to do that? Meanwhile, Carlton and Jason are in the arcade, and Jason's getting haunted by more creepy drawings. Tension is building as more and more drawings turn into the yellow rabbit kidnapping a child, which is extremely eerie and I love it. Like I said, all of this really could have happened the last time they were here, like them having to suddenly teleport back to the motel to have another day of Charlie and John having flashbacks before coming to Freddy's again. Feels forced and like a way to just drag the story out longer than it needs to be. Bonnie on stage sees Dave and the animatronics start tweaking out like in the flashback, and just like in the flashback, he disappears while everyone's mesmerized. Charlie thinks that they're trying to get away, but based on what happens later, I'm not sure if that's actually the case. Now we get one of my favorite pages in the book. Dave is running down the hall, looking back over his shoulder and biting his lip with this insanely creepy childlike giddiness, like he's playing tag or hide and seek or something. He unlocks a a storage room and opens a locker to find his beloved Spring Bonnie suit. I don't know if these motion lines around his hand are showing that he's trembling with excitement or that he's like stroking the fur of the suit, but either way, it's so creepy and disturbing and I just love it. The relationship between William Afton and his mascot persona, Spring Bonnie, is one of the most fascinating parts of his character, and this book depicts it incredibly well. The way he's drawn back to the suit at the first opportunity reminds me a lot of how an addict is drawn to their vice, like drugs or alcohol or gambling. He's addicted to being Spring Bonnie, to the power it gives him over others. I can imagine him giving into his urge to kill as Spring Bonnie over and over and over again during the MCI, which characterizes him more as a depraved serial killer acting on violent urges rather than a methodical villain who's like doing what needs to be done for a higher purpose or something. I love this version of William, and we're gonna get more of it as the book continues. He kidnaps Carlton in front of Jason, and when Jason runs to tell everyone what happened, they hilariously decide that they need to get help and actually just leave the restaurant instead of even trying to help Carlton. Like, for all they know, he's getting killed right now. But the plot has to introduce a new character and fill pages, so they once again cut the Freddy's visit short and teleport to a new location. Chapter 7. The gang's at the police station talking to Clay Burke, who is the chief of police and Carlton's dad. He of course just assumes that Carlton's playing a prank on everyone and invites them over to his house so they can ground him when he gets back. Right off the bat, Clay seems pretty unlikable because he's just filling the ignorant adult who doesn't believe the kid's horror trope, which is a very tedious cliche because we know he'll eventually be convinced and we just have to wait for that to happen. At his house, Clay starts to tell him about another prank Carlton pulled as a kid where he said that he had a twin brother, which calls back to Charlie's twin brother Sammy and possibly suggests that he may also be a fake twin brother. Marla tells him that Jason saw a yellow rabbit try to take him, and Clay gets upset because he thinks they're joking about Freddy's, and he has trauma from the missing children incident because he was a detective working on that case at the time. He says it was the worst thing he ever had to see, which is a very weird way of putting it because he also says that no bodies were ever found, so what did he see? It would have made a lot more sense for him to say something like it was the worst thing that he went through, or it was his biggest personal failure for not being able to find the kids and bring closure to their families. Lamar continues to show that his only purpose is to ask questions that prompt exposition dumps, and Clay tells them that someone was arrested after the children disappeared, but he was released due to lack of evidence. One of the popular theories about the one retcon Scott said he made was that he was referring to the FNAF 1 newspaper that says a suspect was convicted after the MCI, because if that were the case, then it would be impossible for William to be running around free in FNAF 2. But if this version of events is meant to parallel the games, then maybe Scott always intended that to be the case, and he just didn't know what the word convicted means. They sleep over at Clay's house, and Charlie has another nightmare about her childhood, where the creepy endoskeleton jump scares her, and a voice says, "Does it hurt?" once again. I don't think it's the endoskeleton, I think it's a disembodied dream voice. Hey look, it's Chica's magic rainbow on the wall. Chapter 8. It's the next morning, and we get a really good scene of dialogue between Clay and Carlton's mom, Betty. I love Clay in his cute little apron cooking breakfast for all the kiddos. He's just such a dad. Betty is understandably pissed off that Clay did nothing all night while Carlton was missing. When she says she's gonna call the police, Clay gets defensive and hilariously declares that he is the police. He says that she's acting like he doesn't understand the seriousness of Freddy's and reveals that he saw Michael's blood, so I guess that answers the question of what the worst thing he ever had to see was, but if it was just blood, then like, surely he's seen worse things than blood? Whatever. Betty absolutely gags him and says that even though he saw the blood, he didn't see him, his own son who lost his best friend. Clay is acting like he's the victim in all this, but he failed to pay attention to and emotionally support his own son. And his behavior in the present of thinking Carlton would joke about Freddy's is a symptom of him being an emotionally distant father. He doesn't see Carlton, meaning he doesn't understand him in the way emotionally distant parents often don't understand their children. I love these last last two panels where he just looks like an absolute doofus in his apron, and he just knows that he's wrong, and all he can do now is listen to Betty, who is absolutely in the right. This conversation is so good because it reveals so much about their family dynamic, where Clay is a big man of action who does genuinely love his family, but is emotionally distant from Carlton in a way that Betty isn't, and this is clearly a source of a lot of friction in their marriage. We cut to Officer Dunn, one of Clay's policemen who is responding to his call and checking out Freddy's. When he's looking at the mall, he says, "Can't tell creation from destruction from a distance," which refers to how the mall looks like a wreck, but also ties into an ongoing theme in the whole FNAF franchise. Creating things and destroying things aren't binary, mutually exclusive concepts, because nothing in the universe is truly created or destroyed. It just takes different forms over time. When things die, they don't vanish from reality, they degrade and take shape elsewhere in the universe. Think about a deer dying in the woods and its organic matter decomposing and then getting absorbed into the soil, where plants will feed on it and eventually grow. It's the circle of life. In FNAF, this concept applies to living things as they die and possess animatronics. William is destroying the lives of children and simultaneously creating life in the animatronics. But from a philosophical distance, it's just one continual process, not two separate things. Officer Dunn enters Freddy's and finds the animatronic staring creepily at him. We see Dave's shadow skulking around in the background. He pretends to be a limp, lifeless costume and kills Officer Dunn. We cut to Charlie and John rummaging around her old house, which nobody said they were planning to go to, but sure, I guess. John sees her weirdly arranged closets and asks if she found out what was in her big girl closet after all these years, and she's not sure. I wonder what's gonna be in it. Charlie finds a photo album with pictures of her dad, and John tells her that he doesn't think what happened at Freddy's had something to do with him, but she starts crying and tells him that she's not sure, since she remembers him dressing up in the Fredbear costume just like the killer did. She then reveals how he died. I don't want to go into detail because it's a subject some viewers may be sensitive to, and I'm not too familiar with YouTube's policies around talking about it. But the important thing is that it involved the endoskeleton she's been seeing in her flashback nightmares, and that her aunt also knows what happened. Up to this point in the book, I was kind of confused about what specifically happened at Freddy's to traumatize Charlie so much and make it a touchy subject for her. But now I think it's just a combination of what happened to her dad, the MCI, and Sammy, even though she just found out about Sammy earlier in the book. After looking through some photo albums for 2 hours, they find a picture of her dad and someone in the spring Bonnie suit standing together in front of Fredbear's family diner, next to a cutout of a news article about a toddler being kidnapped. This is the first time Charlie is finding out that her dad had a business partner who co-owned the Freddy's restaurants. Since we can see the same creepy silver eyes behind the Bonnie mask, we know that this co-owner is the killer. Marla interrupts them to tell them that Jason has run off by himself back to Freddy's. Chapter 9. We cut to Carlton's perspective as he wakes up inside a mascot suit, in a room that looks very similar to the security office from FNAF 1. He tries getting up, but the suit is too heavy to lift. A voice says, "I wouldn't do that," and Dave enters the room in his spring Bonnie suit. I love this little bow he does as he walks in. It just shows how much he loves being in the suit and how much joy he gets from being Spring Bonnie, like playing a different character. He takes off his mask to reveal his identity to Carlton, who then says another one of my favorite lines from the book. "Never trust a rabbit, I say." Oh really? Do you say that? Do you say that often? He also says what kind of name for a serial killer is Dave, and when he asks, "Do you know what I've put you inside?" he says, "Your girlfriend." This scene is really funny and I like it a lot. Dave then explains how the Springlock suits work. If you move too much, they'll snap and set all the animatronic parts of the suit into your body. And he also reveals that Charlie's dad's name is Henry. The suit Carlton is in is very weird because it doesn't really look like any of the animatronics we know. And Dave says it's one of the first suits Henry made, but it's not one that we've seen before. So maybe it was like a prototype that never actually got used anywhere, at least not the way it was meant to be used. No. Dave takes a lot of pleasure in graphically explaining to Carlton what death by spring locking feels like, which I enjoy a lot because it paints his character as just a truly sadistic bastard. Carlton asks him how he knows all that, and he reveals that he himself has been spring locked before, hence the scars all over his body. This raises a few questions, mainly, why is he naked in the suit? Also, we know it's possible to quote-unquote survive a spring lock failure because we know that William survives in the form of Springtrap in the games, but that definitely severely damages his body to the point where he's literally a decomposing corpse possessing the suit. But here, Dave just has a bunch of scars and that's it. Very weird. We cut back to the gang trying to get back into Freddy's. I love how when Carlton goes missing, they just give up immediately, but when Jason goes missing, they have to get back there as fast as possible. The door is welded shut, but thankfully Charlie knows another secret way in because she just knows the restaurant really well, I guess. They find Jason under the stage almost immediately, and it's really unclear why he came back here, just to hide under the stage and wait for them to find him. Lamar gets on the cameras and sees Dave moving around, so he warns the others via some convenient walkie-talkies that Betty gave him off screen. Carlton hears their voices and tries to get within view of the camera in the room so that they can come rescue him, but as he's scooting across the floor, he sees Golden Freddy, who hits him with his iconic line, "It's me." This is definitely suggesting that whichever missing kid is possessing Golden Freddy, spoiler alert, it's Michael Brooks, is reaching out to Carlton and trying to get him to recognize him, telling him over and over it's him, his best friend. With "it's me" being used in this context, it seems really likely that it's also being used that way in the games, where whichever spirit is possessing Golden Freddy, bite victim, is reaching out to the player to get them to recognize him. Chapter 10. Marla, Jason, and Lamar are watching the cameras to see Bonnie leave the stage, just like how he does in the game, and they tell the others to stay in the control room where it's safe. Charlie, however, spots Carlton and leaves to go rescue him. She gets chased around by Bonnie a bit, and it's a pretty okay action/chase sequence, but it doesn't feel particularly scary or exciting. It more feels like we know Charlie's gonna be fine and we're just waiting for the scene to end. Bonnie doesn't pose a real threat. She rescues Carlton and shows that she's very familiar with how springlock suits work, thanks to her dad. The part where they watch the suit snap closed is actually very unsettling. The way it focuses in while showing us Carlton's reaction makes me feel like I'm in Carlton's head, watching what could have happened to me at any moment for the last several hours. Carlton tells Charlie that not only is Dave the killer, but that the dead kids are still here in the building. And he knows that because he figured out that Michael is in the Golden Freddy suit, which appears to still be slumped over in the corner of the room. Chapter 11. This is a very unnatural chapter break because the scene just keeps going like normal afterwards, and chapter 10 was already like the shortest one so far, so I don't really see any reason why we're starting a new chapter here. It's very weird. The gang is still getting stalked by the animatronics. Foxy snatches Jason. It's all very spooky and chaotic. Meanwhile, Dave returns to the back room and Charlie knocks him out with a baseball bat so they can escape. They end up in the kitchen, and we get kind of a cool reference to the game because they can't see anything and Chica is hiding in there. She looks pretty tough in this panel. They meet up with Jessica and John and talk about escaping, and Charlie says that Dave is their best option for getting out. So they go back and interrogate him. But when they get there, Golden Freddy is gone. So it seems like he's some kind of apparition, or maybe a physical suit that can just teleport. He's as much of a mystery in the books as he is in the games, it turns out. They also find Officer Dunn's body back there. They tie Dave up and splash water on his face to wake him up, but when they start questioning him, he's just kind of sitting there staring blankly. This is like the most Rick and Morty he's ever looked, dude. Charlie and Carlton tell John that Dave is the serial killer, and John punches him in the face. He says, "Take that, jackass." Bro is just not tough. He's trying, but it's not working for him. Even after getting punched, William is still catatonic, no reaction whatsoever, until Charlie brings him the spring Bonnie mask, and suddenly he's got this stupid childlike grin on his face. Charlie says,
"That's it? You want that? You want this? You need this?"
Like he's an excited puppy. And again, I just love this characterization of William. He's an addict having withdrawal. He's unable to function without the suit for long periods of time. When she puts it on him, he starts talking, and we get one of my favorite pages of dialogue in the whole book.
"My dad trusted you. What did you do to him?"
"I helped him create. We both wanted love. Your father loved, and now I have loved. Sick bastard! The kids you killed are still here. You've imprisoned those kids. No, they are home with me. Their happiest day.
How do we get out?
There is no way out anymore. All that is left is family. Then you're trapped here too, so you're not gonna hurt anyone else. And I don't have to. When it gets dark, the spirits will awaken. They will kill you all. I'll just walk out in the morning, stepping over your corpses, one by one.
They'll kill you too.
They're the spirits of the kids you killed. Why would they kill us? It's you they're after. No, I am quite confident that I will survive. They don't remember, they've forgotten. The dead do forget. All they know is that you are here, trying to take away their happiest day. You are intruders, grown-ups. None of you will survive the night. And what makes you think they won't kill you? Because I am one of them. There's a lot to unpack here. First, William says that he helped Henry create, which is probably just broadly referring to Fazbear Entertainment and the animatronics. But it calls back to what we were discussing earlier about the dialectics of creation and destruction, how they're not actually opposites. So William also helped Henry create by imbuing the animatronics with the souls of children, even if it was an accident. His destruction was part of the overall creative process shared between them. Also, he says that they both wanted to love. Henry loved, and now he has loved. So what does he mean by loved here exactly? Well, we can assume that Henry and William both loved Freddy's. They were creative partners, and they loved creating together. So what William means is that both he and Henry loved, but they loved in different ways. We learn more about how Henry loved later in the series, and we can compare and contrast when we get there, but for William, killing the children was an act of love. The idea of creating with love is a very important theme in the rest of the trilogy, so we'll keep an eye out for when it comes back again. He doesn't see their deaths and possessions as an eternal prison, as Carlton describes it, but rather as a home, their happiest day. If you've played the games, that phrase should be setting off tons of alarm bells, because happiest day is where the spirits of the MCI get released in FNAF 3. This line from William suggests that happiest day doesn't refer to the day they get released, but rather an eternal day where they're trapped in purgatory until they're freed. William explains that the kids don't understand that he killed them, but instead see him as part of their family. And this is consistent across multiple continuities. In the movie, the kids serve William because they're lost and confused, and they only turn on him once Abby helps them realize the truth. Let's see if something similar happens in this series. Chapter 12. John goes back to the control room to find the rest of the group, and meanwhile Clay looks through some files in his office and puts it together that William is posing as the mall security guard, clearly setting up for him to come rescue them. We cut back to Freddy's, where we get many pages of them just being chased around by the animatronics. There's not really much to go over here except for them meeting up with the others and finding that Dave got away. We of course get the repeat of the intro teaser where Charlie is hiding from Foxy, but we see that John frickin' epically jump kicks Foxy to save her, and she looks up at him and says,
John.
I'm just gonna take a second to talk about it here. Charlie and John's romance is extremely generic and boring. John just has like no character traits outside of liking Charlie and being a shoulder for her to cry on, which is okay, but they don't have any real chemistry together, and their relationship doesn't serve any greater purpose in the story. Like, it might as well just be a very strong platonic friendship. Like, John could just be her best platonic friend and nothing narratively would change. This is what I like to call mandatory het slop, which is when authors feel the need to arbitrarily have the two main male and female characters fall in love and be a couple and get married and have children because that's just the norm. It's boring because it's everywhere all the time. Stop forcing your straight lifestyle down my throat, Scott Cawthon. If that's how you want to live your life, that's fine, but keep it in the bedroom and out of my beloved franchise. Anyway, they all end up surrounded by the animatronics, and then Golden Freddy shows up, which for some reason helps them realize that the animatronics are possessed by the kids, even though Dave literally just told them that moments ago, but whatever. Then Clay frickin' bashes through the wall with a hammer and enters the scene like a complete badass, and he's gonna rescue them all. But then Dave/William is back, and he grabs Charlie. But Charlie is tough, and she trips his spring locks and kills him. He's totally dead, and he definitely won't come back. I actually like this page of him getting spring-locked. It looks very painful, and I like how bloody it is. We then get the most obvious parallel to the FNAF movie in the entire book, where Freddy and the other animatronics drag the dying William into the back of the restaurant. I think that this is just a visual that Scott was really excited about, and he wanted it to be in the movie, and I'm not complaining because it's pretty cool. What's weird though is that unlike the movie, nothing happened for the animatronics to realize that William wasn't on their side, unless Golden Freddy communicated that to them somehow. It's confusing, but it's far from the most confusing thing in this book, I'll tell you that. Chapter 13. They all leave the mall, and Charlie asks Clay what's going to happen now. And Clay asks her what she thinks should happen, which ties back to when she first saw Freddy's and wished that she had a say in what happened to it, so that she could decide whether she wanted to move on. Now she's being given the opportunity to decide, and she decides that it should be left alone, because it's over. So she got what she wanted, and that's Charlie's narrative arc for the first book. We cut to the next morning, and Charlie and John are standing together in a graveyard, looking at what I assume are Henry and Sammy's graves, and he asks if they're ever going to see each other again, to no response. There's a crow in the distance, which seems to remind Charlie of another memory of her dad, where they're both outside Fredbear's family diner watching a crow peck the ground together. I don't really understand what exactly is happening in this flashback, but the point is that it's a happy memory of her dad as opposed to all the other flashbacks we've seen, which have been tragic and nightmarish. She's able to let the weight of Freddy's go, at least for now, and hold on to the good memories of her dad. And that is the end of the Silver Eyes graphic novel. Overall, I did not care too much for this book. As a fan of Five Nights at Freddy's, I enjoyed seeing how the story of the games was adapted and changed around. I enjoyed seeing characters interact with the FNAF universe, but as an actual story, it was not great. The characters were all pretty dull, and their dialogue just served to further the plot instead of showing their dynamics, their chemistry. Like, they were not believable as friends. Charlie was an interesting protagonist to follow because of the intrigue surrounding her backstory, but that's about it. William/Dave was by far the most engaging character, and he's overall my favorite portrayal of William Afton in the whole franchise. There are themes like creation as love and being trapped and without agency to make choices that we discussed, and we should keep them in mind as we move to the next book in the series, The Twisted Ones. Five Nights at Freddy's The Twisted Ones, the graphic novel, is the graphic novel adaptation of the second Five Nights at Freddy's novel, The Twisted Ones, and it was published in 2021. It was written by Scott Cawthon and Kira Breed-Wrisley, adapted by Christopher Hastings, and illustrated by Claudia Aguirre, with colors by Laurie Smith and Ava de la Cruz. Just like we did with the first book, let's take a look at the art before we get into the story, as the art is going to be the most important part of a graphic novel. If you've skipped ahead to the start of this book, go ahead and rewind to the beginning of the Silver Eyes section to hear my explanation about why artwork is so important to the visual medium. The artwork in The Twisted Ones is fantastic. It is leaps and bounds better than the Silver Eyes in literally every respect. Character design, backgrounds, colors, paneling, sound effects, everything. This book is a visual treat to look at, and I am so happy about that because I'm very tired of looking at the Silver Eyes. The panels are much larger because the artist actually wants you to see as much of their work as possible, so the pages feel much more full. There are still some gradient backgrounds, but not nearly as many, and there's no just completely missing backgrounds. Also, the colors are much more vivid, and the whole book has a grainy quality to it that makes it feel much more stylized and less sleek and sanitary than the first one. It's overall much better visually. It utilizes the visual medium much more effectively, and it feels like a more worthwhile adaptation. Now, let's begin the story of The Twisted Ones. The book does not start with a flash forward to the climax, which is very much appreciated. There are also no chapters. Instead, the book starts with a professor giving a lecture in a massive lecture hall.
Don't trust your eyes. Your eyes deceive you every day, filling in the blanks for you in a world of sensory overload. At every moment, your senses are receiving far more information than they can process all at once, and your mind is forced to choose which signals to pay attention to. The things we are familiar with are the things we can, for the most part, ignore.
This theme of senses being untrustworthy and easy to manipulate is central to this installment of the trilogy in particular, so keep it in mind as we read. We see that Charlie, our protagonist from the first book, is attending this lecture, but she's not listening. She's thinking about John coming to visit her for the first time since the end of the Silver Eyes. She's also thinking about Sammy, which sort of serves as a recap for the reader, but she also says that he's near and that he's pulling her back to where she lost him, which is also going to be important for the story of this book. We get a short flashback to when she recently had a fight with her Aunt Jen, because she was going back to Hurricane to find out more about her past, but she didn't want her to go. Aunt Jen says that she's done too much for Charlie to just have her go back there after what happened last time, which upsets Charlie because she feels like Aunt Jen hasn't actually been a parental figure for her, so it's not fair for her to be exercising parental authority like this. We learn that Aunt Jen's true fear is that Charlie will suffer the same fate as her father. She characterizes his actions as weakness, and she wants Charlie to be stronger than him. So even though Charlie was able to decide what to do with Freddy's at the end of the last book, she's still struggling with the lack of autonomy in her life. What happened to her dad was completely out of her control, and now her personal autonomy is still being restricted as a result. It's not explicitly stated in the book, but this is a common thing that happens in real life to people who struggle with mental illness. People in their lives who care about them and want to protect them will often feel the need to step in and make decisions for them, because mental illness can often lead to bad decision making. It's a hard thing to deal with because lots of mentally ill people do really need the support, and their support figures are usually just trying to do what's best for them, but it doesn't change the fact that having your autonomy restricted sucks. This is the conflict that Charlie and Aunt Jen are having. Aunt Jen wants to protect Charlie and has a valid reason for concern considering her family's history of mental illness and Charlie's own history of entering dangerous situations. But Charlie resents her for trying to take her personal autonomy away from her, that ability to make her own decisions. She drives away from Aunt Jen's and arrives at Jessica's door, and she's surprised to see her, but mostly just happy that she's there, which shows that she's the type of person who's just ready to help at any moment and who isn't bothered by a lack of planning or invitation or social niceties like that. I'm so happy that we're getting so much characterization from just the first few pages alone. Every new panel is serving a specific purpose and not just wasting space to fill pages. Charlie snaps out of her flashback when the lecture ends, and we see that instead of taking notes, she's been sketching, working on cool robotic engineering stuff. So she's probably doing the robotics MBA program that she saw in Jessica's room in the flashback. Artie, another student in her class, goes up to her and asks about what she's drawing, and she says it's just math. He's very excited to talk to her, and she is not. She is very tired. He follows her out into the hallway and is trying to rizz her up by asking if she wants to go do a group project with him, but she's not interested at all because she has to go meet John, and she's thinking about him and Freddy's and her trauma and everything. Artie brings up the urban legend of the Freddy's murders, which really upsets Charlie, and she leaves. We then have a really fantastic full-page spread of Charlie walking down the street with these looming shattered images of the climax of the last book kind of blooming around her. This is the type of really indulgent, passionate, full-page artwork that we just didn't get in the Silver Eyes at all. This actually feels like the artists were proud of their work and confident that it's going to wow the reader, and they were right. She gets back to Jessica's dorm where she's staying, and we see that her side is just a complete mess while Jessica's is very pretty with fairy lights and little Polaroid photos, just the iconic white girl college dorm room, and I love that for her. I love that for both of them. Charlie pulls out these two endoskeleton heads that kind of talk to each other with rudimentary phrases, and it seems like they're her pet robotics project. Jessica comes back and she quickly hides them, probably just to avoid freaking her out, but they fall out of the bag and freak her out anyway. Jessica asks what she's programming them to do, and she says that she's trying to get them to learn on their own. So she's basically trying to make creative AI. I have to mention it because it's so obvious. She's making the mimic. They're endoskeletons that can learn from their surroundings and program themselves. It's Charlie made the mimic, guys. After she explains that, her and Jessica have a conversation. A real conversation between two friends about how Charlie feels about her upcoming meeting with John. Jessica asks her if she's nervous, and she instinctively tries to deny it and hide her emotions, but quickly gives in and says that she's worried they'll have to talk about Freddy's because it's the only thing they have in common. Jessica tells her that John's probably trying to move on from it, and that he may not even bring it up. She hypes her up and pushes her out the door, and Charlie says that she's been doing sit-ups. This dialogue actually makes it seem like Charlie and Jessica are real friends, not just roles in a teen horror mystery movie cast. We see that Jessica isn't just a generic rich popular girl who reacts to everything in the exact way you'd expect that type of character to. She is complicated. She cares about Charlie's feelings. She wants to make her feel more confident. She values being a good friend to her. She's easy to talk to. These are actual traits that make up an actual character. Charlie, unlike Jessica, is socially awkward and anxious. She overthinks stuff and finds it easier to bury her emotions than to address them or share them. And it makes perfect sense why she would be friends with Jessica, because she doesn't make her feel judged or like her feelings are a burden. She's a hype man and a dependable person to lean on. They are actual characters who actually have chemistry and an interesting dynamic. Guys, this is literally just the bare minimum, but I have been so starved by the Silver Eyes that this just feels like a masterpiece. She meets up with John, and he remarks that she's just the same as he remembers, which she disagrees with. She tells him that she cut her hair and that she's been doing sit-ups. That's the second time in 2 pages that she said that, so I guess that means we have to analyze it. Sit-ups are a common exercise that strengthen your core, so like your abs and that whole area. Charlie says that she's been doing sit-ups as a rebuttal to John saying that she hasn't changed. So she's saying, no, I have changed, my core is stronger, which literally means that her abs are stronger, but could also just be a metaphor for her being stronger overall. She's more resilient as a person physically and mentally. This ties back to Aunt Jen telling her that she has to be stronger than her dad, which is something that she's been thinking about since she moved in with Jessica, probably since the end of the last book. So she wants people to see that she is stronger, or at least she's trying to get there. They go to a food court and catch up a bit. John says that he dropped out of school and got a construction job. He says school is expensive and a library card is free, because he's so smart and he doesn't need school to learn. He is kind of right, though. He reveals to Charlie that her dad's house was damaged by a hurricane that recently passed through, which is another instance of something happening outside of Charlie's control. She wanted to go back and process more of her childhood, but the choice was taken away from her. Her immediate reaction is to get up and say that she has to go to class, so basically just run away without dealing with it at all. But John stops her and asks if she's been okay, so he's kind of functioning in a similar way to Jessica. He's challenging Charlie to be less avoidant and more open about her feelings. She tells him about what's been on her mind.
Ever since last year, I felt like he's been with me in a way. I know he's not, he's dead, but it was like gaining that knowledge he was real. And when those memories came back to me, it was like I felt whole in a way I don't know how to describe. And then my birthday this year, I woke up and it was just like he disappeared. I felt incomplete, but it's not just like loss. It feels like he's trapped somewhere, like he's so close, but he's stuck.
Right when she's about to leave, John asks her if she wants to go out with him tonight, and it's pretty clear he's been working up the courage to ask. Hilariously, it completely goes over Charlie's head, and he has to spell it out for her, which is pretty cute. Overall, this scene was fine, but it wasn't as good as the last one with Jessica, because John is still, unfortunately, a very boring character. He doesn't have any definable traits other than being in love with Charlie and just generally being a sweet guy. It looks like we're gonna be in for another book's worth of mandatory het slop. Charlie's walking away all excited about her date when she suddenly runs into Clay, the police chief. So she barely gets 5 minutes of actually enjoying like a youthful experience before she has to deal with some Freddy stuff again. Clay tells her that he wants her to come take a look at a dead body they just found, and for some reason he doesn't want to tell her anything about it until she sees it, which is weird. On the drive to the body, he tells her what Carlton's been up to, and she asks him if they ever talk about what happened at Freddy's. He says that he talks to his mother more than him, which reinforces the family dynamic they established in the first book, with Clay being an emotionally distant father. He then tells Charlie this: "You know, Charlie, when terrible things happen, you can do one of two things. You can leave them behind, or you can let them consume you."
I'm not my father.
I didn't mean that. I just meant you have to look forward. Of course, my wife says there's a third thing. Process it and come to terms with it. She's probably right. So Clay lays out two options for dealing with trauma. Move past it and continue on with life without addressing it, or obsess over it and let it consume you, basically take over your life and destroy it. He thinks that the first option is correct, and that Charlie should try to pursue it instead of continuing down the path of the second option, as Henry did. This is a binary, simplified way of thinking that Clay is exhibiting, and the story is setting it up to be shown as wrong. Clay is quote-unquote moving on from the Freddy's trauma by just not talking or thinking about it, but that's not actually moving on, that's just avoiding it and leaving it unresolved. And as long as something's unresolved, it's literally impossible to move on from completely. It's gonna be affecting him and even getting worse the longer it goes unaddressed. We'll see if he experiences any consequences from that. Henry did the opposite and never moved on from Sammy's death, or the other stuff that was going on back then, which we'll find out later. And he literally lost his life as a result. He was consumed, as Clay said, which is what both him and Aunt Jen are worrying will happen to Charlie if she keeps down the path she's on. But Clay mentions the secret third option, one he says his wife, who we know to be more emotionally intelligent than him, would agree with. Process and come to terms with the trauma. Unlike the first two, this is not binary. It's dialectical, meaning that it holds two seemingly opposite things to be true at the same time. It means to radically accept that the trauma is there and that you'll never be able to escape it, but learning to coexist peacefully with it and not let it dictate your life. It's the most difficult path, but it's the only one that actually yields a positive result. I think that's the option that Charlie's gonna take. She has another flashback to Sammy getting kidnapped, and it implies that they're both trapped in some way, but it's very vague. I think we might be overdoing it with all the flashbacks at this point, because we get it. We understand that Sammy got kidnapped and that she's feeling like he's still out there. She's drawn towards him, so it's getting a little repetitive. They make it to the body, and Clay says Charlie's the only person who can tell him if it is what he thinks it is, which feels like a contrived way to get the plot started, because if he already has a solid idea of what he thinks it is, then he doesn't really need Charlie to double check. Also, he could have just shown her a picture or something. Surprise, surprise, the body has springlock injuries all over it, so it seems like someone used a springlock suit to kill them. Charlie explains how springlock suits work to Clay, and to the reader if they somehow are reading the second installment of a FNAF graphic novel adaptation trilogy and don't know. They get back in the car and Charlie asks Clay what happened to Freddy's, and he tells her that it's in the process of getting demolished. Hilariously, he mentions that guard Dave's body was never found, which is just insane that he wouldn't have mentioned that earlier or thought that it may be important to this recent murder case. He's not a very good dad or detective, it turns out. He dismisses it as his body just getting buried in a crevice that nobody will find for years, which is kind of a funny FNAF 3 reference. He tells her that most of the stuff that mattered was taken out of the building and thrown out or buried, but the animatronics are still there, and the demolition was never fully completed due to the recent storm. He tells her not to go there, but obviously we're getting set up for that to happen later. Right as she's getting dropped off, he tells her that they also found fake blood at the scene of Dave's supposed death, and when Charlie asks why he's telling her this, he says he survived once before. So he goes from not even thinking that the murder had something to do with Dave, to casually mentioning that his body wasn't found, to casually mentioning that not only that, but there was fake blood at the scene, and now he's ominously telling Charlie that he might still be out there. What? He really didn't need Charlie to figure any of this out, but the plot has to happen, so there we go. We cut to John and Charlie's date at Thai restaurant. That's literally what it's called. And like Charlie was worried about, they're having trouble talking about stuff other than Freddy's. But it's mostly because she just doesn't want him to know that she's been studying engineering and has to constantly avoid the subject. She's worried that he'll think that she's following in her dad's footsteps and get worried about her, just like everyone else is. But I think we all know that John would be chill with it. He also asks if being at college feels isolating, and Charlie says that if it's a prison, then it's not the worst first one, which says a lot about her state of mind. She's so used to feeling trapped that the isolation of her college experience is just the norm for her. As expected, Charlie's having trouble opening up to John, but John shares a lot with her about his work, not just the facts and figures of it, but how he actually feels about it. He says he took a job in Hurricane because he was trying to get away from where he was before, and Charlie asks him what it was, hoping that he also has nightmares like her, because if he did, then she would be less alone. I love the use of text boxes in this panel, and there's a few others like it during this scene where you get what Charlie's saying versus what she actually means. It's a very good use of the graphic novel medium. It's not nightmares for John though, instead it's an ex-girlfriend who he met the summer after Freddy's. He says she broke up with him because there was stuff about Freddy's, which was like this huge life-changing event for him, that he felt like he couldn't tell her because she wouldn't understand, and she could tell that he was holding something back from her. So John is exhibiting how Clay's first option for dealing with trauma, ignoring it and burying it in the past, actually has a destructive effect in his life because it hurt one of his close personal relationships. But this actually means a lot for his relationship with Charlie because they both have the unique shared experience of Freddy's, so they wouldn't have to hide their trauma from each other. Except that's exactly what Charlie's trying to do, so we'll see if her character develops and she's able to open up about her feelings with those she trusts. She starts thinking about the victim Clay showed her, and when she goes to the bathroom to collect herself, she sees an evil version of herself looking back at her in the mirror, but it seems like it's just a stress-induced hallucination. Also, I think I said I was going to keep track of all the times Charlie abruptly gets up and leaves since the first book, but I think I dropped the ball on that. You guys have probably been noticing though, it happens a lot. They finish dinner and go to see a zombie movie called Zombies vs. Zombies, and Charlie thinks that a dumb movie will help them relax. But of course, the blood and guts and violence makes her think even more about the dead body. She's not panicking this time. Instead, she's trying to remember details about the crime scene to solve the mystery. She figures out that the suit that killed him must have been much larger than a regular spring-lock suit, and that it was able to move by itself to transport the victim inside across town. She also gets really upset by the movie because zombies don't make sense scientifically, because why would being undead make them want to eat brains? John says that it might be symbolic and draws a comparison between that and the concept of eating your enemy's heart to gain their power. I thought for a while about if this was supposed to tie in thematically with anything else from the book or just FNAF in general, and the closest I could come up with is like William using remnant from his victims to make himself more powerful, but it's kind of a stretch. I think the point of this is more so to just characterize Charlie as a scientific person who needs to figure out the reason for everything, just like how she's figuring out what happened to the murder victim, while John is more content to just go, it's symbolic. They leave the theater and Charlie apologizes for being such a bad date, but of course John is happy just to have seen her because John is a simp. Again, not a pejorative. She finally opens up to him a little and tells him about Clay coming to see her earlier that day, and she tells John that she wants to go to Freddy's and make sure that Dave's really dead because it's really bothering her. John kind of rudely shuts this down and tells her that she's just being crazy and it's probably nothing, but like, she saw the actual body and he didn't see anything. He has no basis for this. It's another instance of people treating Charlie like she's a danger to herself and trying to coddle her, but there's just something so annoying about when John does it because it's just so paternalistic and the opposite of what would make him a remotely likable character. Like, we've already gotten so many instances of people telling Charlie what to do out of fear of her safety. It would be so cool if John were the one character who actually took her side and was like, you're probably right, I'll go with you too, so that he actually stands out as someone who loves her. But no, instead he just doesn't listen to her and tries to manage her around. I'm just begging for John to be remotely interesting or subversive at this point. Anyway, they agree to meet up again tomorrow, and Charlie silently decides that she's definitely going to go back to Freddy's and check if Dave's still there. She gets back to Jessica's dorm, and of course she's excitedly waiting at the door to hear all about how the date went. Charlie tells her that it was uncomfortable despite it being John, and Jessica hypes her up because she's a true girl's girl. Charlie tells her that she needs her to come with her somewhere in the morning, and Jessica starts to say that she's got a lot going on right now and she's too busy, but when Charlie says it's to pick out clothes for her next date, Jessica is super pumped. Of course, that's not actually what Charlie wants to do, it's just a ploy to get her to go to Freddy's with her, which is really not the nicest thing to do, but Charlie's having some issues right now, you know? Jessica goes back to bed while Charlie stays up to work on her mimic project. And guys, I just love Jessica in this book so much. She's so funny and she's just such a good friend to Charlie. I really love their dynamic together. Twisted once Jessica stays on top. Charlie falls asleep working on her project and has another nightmare sequence, and like I said earlier, we get it already. Like, we know that she's going through stuff. We're kind of just wasting time now. She wakes up and John is there, and this is where things get extremely confusing and stop making sense. John sees Theodore, the robot bunny from her dad's house, and she says she's using him for a project, which he asks if he can see. And she's like unbelievably excited to show it to him? What? So the writers just straight up forgot that literally mere pages ago, Charlie was thinking that she didn't want John to know that she was studying engineering and following in her father's footsteps, but now she's excitedly showing him her robot mimic heads? That just straight up doesn't make any sense. But of course, there's a reason for it, and the reason is that we, the reader, need to have this earpiece thing explained to us. Basically, the robots can only interact with each other normally, but if someone wears the earpiece, they become visible to them and are able to interact with them. John asks why, as in, why would she want to do that? And Charlie says that she made them, so naturally she wants to interact with them. This line says a lot about her character because it shows that she's a creative, but she's not content to just create something and leave it be. She wants to go the extra step and interact with it. She wants to create machines that behave like living things, which puts her in line with a type of creativity we've seen from both Henry and William, which is probably not a good thing. We cut to Charlie and Jessica arriving at the abandoned mall where Freddy's is, and obviously Jessica is mad that she tricked her. Charlie doesn't actually explain why she wanted to go, and instead she just lets Jessica believe her own idea that it's just because of John being back or something. I know that Charlie's hesitant to reveal her thoughts in general, but at this point, like, Jessica is already there, and you're already going into the building. So I think it would make sense for her to at least know as much as John knows at this point, but whatever. We then get the most blatant mistake in the book. Charlie lies to Jessica and says that she wants to see the pizzeria to remind herself that it's really over. But she says that last part as a question in the next panel. And then Jessica says something like that. What? No. They flipped it around. Jessica is supposed to finish Charlie's sentence here, and then Charlie is supposed to say something like that. This literally is just a mistake. The book is starting to test my patience. They wander around for a bit and kind of remember what happened in the last book, and Charlie says that she wants to check the back room to see if anything's left in there. Jessica corrects her and says any bodies left. So she literally just knows exactly why Charlie's here already. Charlie is not very slick with her lying, and at this point I do kind of wish that Jessica was actually more upset about Charlie tricking her instead of just going along with it, because that would actually force Charlie to consider that lying causes more pain than telling the truth, which would help her overall development towards radical acceptance of everything, but no, that doesn't happen. They search around some more and eventually find Dave, spring-locked and decomposing in the spring Bonnie suit. I really like this full-page spread that shows off Dave's design for this book. I think he looks much cooler and more in line with Springtrap in the games. So Charlie got what she wanted because Dave seems to be very dead, but since we've played the games, we know that he's very not. He's just messing with them, or maybe like sleeping? Jessica asks Charlie if she wants to give him a foot massage too, which actually got a good laugh out of me. Twisted once Jessica stays on top as always, and they leave to go back to campus. Charlie's studying with Artie in the library, but as usual she's distracted thinking about Freddy's stuff, Sammy and Dave, and what happened to the murder victim. She's looking at crazy markings in her notebook thinking that Sammy drew them, when it was probably just her and she forgot. She then abruptly gets up and runs away, but she thinks that the door is stuck and that she's trapped. So once again, she's hitting the motifs of suddenly and dramatically leaving in the middle of a social interaction and feeling trapped. She runs out of the library and starts driving around. She's thinking about what her professor said in class at the beginning of the book, about your senses being unreliable because they have to disseminate which information to focus on. She's wondering why she's been feeling so anxious recently and thinks that maybe it's because she's been inside too much. But she's basically just tweaking out. As she's driving around, just completely randomly, and by pure coincidence, she finds another dead body laying in the field, and it's a woman that she thinks looks just like her. And I mean, yeah, kind of, but Charlie is having a breakdown, so it's understandable why this would freak her out. She runs into a nearby gas station to use their phone, and the clerk plays a silly prank on her with some kind of taxidermied coyote or wolf head hidden in the cooler. She opens it and thinks it's Foxy jumping out at her, and then she thinks more about her professor's lecture about senses being deceiving. This theme is becoming more and more relevant as the story continues, because Charlie is becoming increasingly paranoid and experiencing symptoms of psychosis. I am not a doctor. I am a YouTuber with a 4-year liberal arts degree discussing themes of mental health in a Five Nights at Freddy's graphic novel. Please consult a real doctor if you have any questions or concerns about the following information. Psychosis is a condition that can be caused by a wide range of mental illnesses, substance use, health issues, and more. And it basically describes when an individual loses their grip on reality. It can include things like auditory or visual hallucinations, or more minor symptoms like paranoia or jumbled erratic thoughts and speech. Charlie isn't explicitly stated to have a specific type of mental illness, but she exhibits common symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, which often affects people who have experienced traumatic events. Psychosis can result from PTSD in some cases, but we're dealing with FNAF here, so we're getting this real-life medical stuff mixed in with spooky paranormal haunting stuff and some other stuff that's coming up, but I definitely think that Charlie is meant to be experiencing some form of psychosis here. This also ties back to our discussion earlier about people in Charlie's life who want to look out for her, but don't trust her to make good decisions for herself due to her family history of mental illness and her own erratic behavior. Now, as Charlie's anxiety and paranoia get worse, they have even more justification to keep her coddled. Anyway, she calls Clay and he comes to meet her at the new dead body. He kind of chastises her for looking into it in the first place, again showing that overbearing protectiveness that everyone in her life treats her with, and she correctly points out that it's because of the body he showed her. Like, he literally roped her into this and is now mad at her for taking part in it. Hilariously, his first comment upon seeing the body is that it looks just like her, that it could even be her twin, and Charlie says that it doesn't look that much like her or her twin, but we know that she had the same exact first reaction. So she's in denial about the victim looking like her, either because she doesn't want to believe that she'll end up like her, or that the killer was looking for her and got the wrong white girl. Charlie is determined to prove that she's not the same as her, so she asks Clay if she can go to her house and gather evidence to prove it. When she gets there, she admits to herself that she doesn't even know what she's looking for. There's no tangible way to prove that she's nothing like her. She's just kind of continuing on her manic frenzy because there's nothing else for her to do. She has to do something. But she does find something, because in the backyard, there are 3 large coffin-shaped holes in the ground. Very spooky. As she gets back in her car, she realizes that she was supposed to meet John for a date 2 hours ago. I wonder where they're eating this time. Ah yes, my favorite restaurant, Italian. I guess Thai restaurant wasn't cutting it. She goes in, and of course John is just waiting there for her like a lost puppy, just eating in the corner booth by himself. He's not beating the simp allegations, I'm afraid. Charlie says to meet her in the bathroom so she can give him the update, and he is just locked in and ready to go. I really like how he's drawn in this panel, saying, "Check please," like bro does not look tough at all. She calls Clay again from a payphone and asks if she can get the addresses of the other victims. There was another victim, by the way, I forgot to mention that. She washes up in the bathroom and starts tweaking again because she thinks that the door is stuck. She's having visions of the killer and Sammy and all that. We know the drill by now. She runs into John, and he starts taking her out of the restaurant to go talk in private. As they go, this old lady is staring at them, and John covers for Charlie by saying it's just food poisoning. And then in the next panel, the old lady is all scared of her food. This was a small thing, but I found it pretty funny and charming. They end up going back to Charlie's old house, which, as we learned earlier, is a bit wrecked from the hurricane. When they pull up, John thinks that she just wants to be there to see the damage, but instead of correcting him or telling the truth, Charlie does what she did with Jessica earlier and just lets him believe that, which again is like, I get it, but it's getting really tedious because I know it's just a matter of time before everyone gets on the same page. So as the reader, we're just waiting for that to happen so the story can continue. They explore the house, John falls through the stairs because it's falling apart, and they make it up to Charlie's bedroom with with the 3 iconic mysterious closets. She says hi to Ella, and John finds a picture of her as a kid and remarks that she was no bigger than her. And we can see that she's even wearing a very similar blue and white dress, which is pretty creepy. Charlie suddenly gets a vision of a sketch of what looks like 3 closets, but she says that they're not these doors, which is confusing because they are those doors. They go to the workshop to keep looking around, and John repeatedly asks Charlie what exactly she's looking for as she throws things around in a panic search. She tells him that she's supposed to be there, but she doesn't know what she's supposed to find, so I guess this is where Sammy has been drawing her towards in her dreams and visions. John is still confused because she hasn't actually explained anything to him, so he still thinks she means just regular objects and keepsakes around the house. But she finally corrects him and lets him know what she's thinking.
This isn't about the storm, John. It's not about happy memories or that toy or closure or whatever you think I need. This is about monsters. They're out there and they're killing people. And you and I both know that there is only one place they could have come from. Here. All I can think about is Sammy. I feel him right now. I can feel him in this place, but he's cut off. It doesn't even make sense. He died before my father and I moved here. But I know I'm here for a reason. There's something that I'm supposed to find. It's all connected, but I don't know how. Maybe something to do with the doors? I don't know.
So we knew before that Sammy was probably drawing her here, but she's also apparently here because she thinks that the mysterious animatronic monsters must have come from her dad's workshop. I understand why she may not have wanted to tell John about the first part, but he already knows about the murders. Like, he's doing the investigation with her right now. So why on earth would she not tell him about the second part? There's literally no reason for her to withhold that information from her. And this is what I'm talking about when I say that her not bringing people up to speed on stuff is getting annoying. Because it's not even important for the plot or her character, it's just miscommunication for no reason. Anyway, they find a secret room that Charlie has never seen before, and it has 3 holes in the floor that look identical to the one she found in the victim's yard. And now, of course, she has to explain to John everything that happened with Clay earlier. I'm so tired, guys. John is understandably shocked that Charlie didn't tell him this, and she thinks to herself that it was also the fact that she looked like her and she didn't want to say that. That part is understandable because she's still having trouble processing that herself, and opening up is still hard for her and everything. But when she got to Italian, she literally said that she was going to tell him everything, meaning everything that just transpired with Clay. So I would assume that she was at least actually truthfully planning to tell him at least the gist of what happened, so he would understand why they're here now, but she just didn't for some reason, and oh my god, I'm gonna lose it. This book, it's twisting me, guys. I'm gonna be the twisted ones by the end of this. Thankfully, they find a blank metal Foxy-looking animatronic in one of the holes, and we have now, after 78 pages, actually arrived at the monsters that this book is named after. Charlie looks at it and says that it seems to be older technology, and she recognizes some of her dad's work, but says a lot of it is foreign to her and probably made by somebody else, and we can all take a pretty good guess at who that is. Foxy then springs to life, and he's not blank anymore, he's twisted. He kind of looks like a bizarro version of Nightmare Foxy from FNAF 4, but he also has like an open spring-locked chest. But one thing's for sure, he looks metal as f***. I actually love this monster design. It is so peak. I love how fleshy he looks when he's still obviously being like a cyborg robot type of thing. And I love the little touches of the algae and barnacles that fit into his pirate theme. It's like a version of Foxy that freaking drowned and decomposed at the bottom of the sea. He's just so cool. And I love that we get these vibrant, colorful, full panels that show him off in all his glory. Thank you, Twisted Ones, the graphic novel, for giving me something to enjoy after I don't even know how long. It's been a while, guys. Foxy tries to stuff her into his spring-locked chest, and that part seems to terrify her more than anything because she's so afraid of being trapped. But of course, John saves the day again and knocks his head off. Charlie says,
"What the heck just happened?"
Even though Foxy's deactivated, John's still being affected by something. He's feeling sick and says there's something like a horrible smell in the air, but without the smell. Charlie finds a tiny computer chip in Foxy that's emitting a high-pitched tone that was making John sick, and probably doing something else too. I wonder why it wasn't making Charlie sick. They take the chip back to the dorm so Charlie can examine it closer, and she finds a tiny inscription on it that reads Afton Robotics, which we know from the games to be William's company that he designed the Funtime animatronics under. We'll talk about that some more later. Charlie says that she always felt like these chips weren't made by her dad because they didn't feel like his work, and once we find out what these chips do, we'll be able to draw a clearer distinction between Henry and William. Charlie and John put 2 and 2 together and realize that William Afton, who was Henry's business partner, is Dave's real name. So now I can finally stop calling him Dave sometimes and just William, which should be much less confusing. Charlie said she thought that William was nothing more than a business partner, and she didn't know that he actually worked on robots and technology too. So it seems like William's contributions to Fazbear technology were kept more under wraps than Henry's. John thankfully finally asks Charlie if there's anything else she's been hiding from him that he needs to know, and she tells him how one of the victims looked like her. And yeah, I totally understand why that information was difficult for her to share, so I'm just glad that they're on the same page now, and it's nice to see that Charlie is learning that opening up to people is actually a good thing. They break out a map and start connecting the locations of the victims to try to find a link between them, and Charlie unconsciously draws another door-shaped object. John asks her what it is, and she thinks to herself that she doesn't even know, and that in general she just still doesn't know what she's looking for. Jessica comes home while they're in the middle of figuring it out on the map and instantly joins in, even though John tries and fails to tell her that it's not anything serious. Jessica cannot be fooled, or I guess she can't be fooled twice in the same book. They all kind of bring each other up to speed about how Jessica went with Charlie to Freddy's and John went with her to her dad's house, and they found out about these new monsters. Jessica asks Charlie why she didn't tell her because she was at Freddy's last year too, just like John, and Charlie says that she doesn't want to put anyone at risk, which John half jokes that she's putting him at risk, but like, she also put Jessica at risk by bringing her to Freddy's. Again, we have the lying or admitting information because it's hard to talk about, and then we just have lying to people for no reason only to make the reader wait for them to inevitably find out. It's so tedious. They figure out from the map that the Twisted Ones are in fact looking for Charlie, and that they bury themselves during the day and move around at night, hence the coffin-shaped holes. John suggests that instead of waiting for them to try to find Charlie again, they should take the fight to them and find them before they kill again. They drive out to a housing complex they think they'll be at. I guess that's where the map clues led them to, and Charlie starts trying to think about where they're buried. When she's thinking, she feels like she's locked in a dark box that looks a lot like the holes the twisted animatronics are buried in, and kind of the door shapes she's been drawing. So we're seeing this motif of her being trapped combined with this recurring image of some kind of rectangular box, which reminds me of a coffin. The animatronics being buried in coffin-shaped holes, which the characters even refer to as graves sometimes, is an obvious parallel to zombies, mummies, or vampires. Undead creatures rising from their graves. So if we think about what John said earlier about zombies eating brains being a metaphor for them gaining power, maybe the twisted animatronics are eating people in pursuit of some kind of power too. But we don't know what that is yet. We know why Charlie feels trapped, but what does it mean that she sees herself as trapped specifically in this kind of box, buried in a coffin? Well, it could mean that she's dead, or she at least feels dead. Since we know everyone's worried about her turning out like her dad, who is dead, maybe she's envisioning herself as trapped in the sense of being doomed to his fate. Or maybe she's literally dead. I guess we'll see. She struggles with the car door, another instance of this type of thing happening, and she gets out and asks her dad what she's missing, kind of like she's looking to his spirit for guidance. And she intuits that there's something in the back lot near this complex. So she gets a shovel and flashlight and stuff from her trunk, and she gives John a crowbar and says that she figures that he can swing a crowbar harder than her, because man strong and woman weak. They go start digging in the back lot, and Jessica and John start fighting pretty much because Charlie hasn't been doing a good job of keeping them both up to speed on everything. I'm really glad they're fighting because it shows that they both have feelings about what's been going on, and they're actually having a contentious conversation, which literally never happens between two secondary characters in the entire first book. It's this type of realistic friend group dynamic that these books are just desperately lacking, so it's very refreshing to see it here. Charlie eventually unearths Twisted Freddy in his default blank mode. Unlike Twisted Foxy, who still looked like Nightmare Foxy even in his blank mode, Freddy looks a lot like Funtime Freddy with his rosy cheeks and split down the center of his face. When we learn more about how the Twisted animatronics work, we'll talk about what their similarities to both the Funtimes and the Nightmares may imply for the games. Jessica and John go to the nearby gas station to call Clay, and Charlie stays behind to look over Freddy, asking him why William took Sammy instead of her, why she was chosen to live instead of him. And now I have to ask you guys, why have you chosen to watch this incredibly long video about the Silver Eyes graphic novels all the way through to this point? I hope it's because you've been enjoying it, or because you've fallen asleep, which is definitely one of the correct ways to enjoy this video. If you're not asleep and you have been enjoying it, please go ahead and leave a like to let me know that you actually like watching this type of video. If it gets 1,000 likes, I'll make a part 2 where I cover the Fazbear Frights graphic novel adaptations. Also, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. I do FNAF theories, discussions, and live streams on a regular basis, and I wouldn't want you to miss the next one. Now, back to the Twisted ones. Jessica and John call Clay at the gas station. The guy tries the same prank on John, but it doesn't work because he's tough. Clay shows up and they talk about how to get everyone in the complex evacuated before Freddy wakes up, and Clay says he's gonna go do that and to keep watch. But then Freddy wakes up and the high-pitched ringing starts again because Freddy has the same chip that Foxy did, and now Freddy is starting to look all spooky and twisted too. John drops another one of my favorite lines in the series: "We're not at Freddy's anymore." They run back to Clay's car, and he says that he told the residents that there was a gas leak in the area, but wait, when did that happen exactly? He said he was gonna go check who's home in the buildings, but the very next thing we see is Freddy waking up and he's standing right there with them. Maybe there was a longer time gap between these two panels, but there's literally nothing to indicate that. So this sequence is just confusing. Anyway, they get in the car and Charlie explains what the chip does.
We found it in the animatronic that attacked us today, and I think I figured out how it works. In class, we learned that when the brain is overstimulated, it fills in gaps for you. So say you pass a red hexagonal sign on the road and someone asked you what words were on it, you'd say stop, and you'd imagine you saw it. But if you were properly distracted, you wouldn't even see that the sign was blank. You're conditioned to see it with the word. That's what this does. It's emitting sound waves that create and then break patterns at such a high pitch and so fast that only your subconscious detects it. Your mind gets overwhelmed and the chip makes it see what we think we should be seeing. The animatronics aren't actually changing shape. It's doing this to earn our trust, to look more friendly, to look more real, to lure kids closer.
Earlier, we were talking about how things like psychosis can induce hallucinations, and how the book is hitting us over the head with the theme of senses being unreliable. So the Twisted animatronics are using this technology to make kids see them as friendly, cuddly creatures because that's how the vast majority of kids in this world see Freddy's. That's how they're familiar with the brand. But our characters have trauma from their experiences at Freddy's, so their brains fill in the gaps with ugly, horrific monsters. This is a really cool concept that blends weird FNAF sci-fi stuff with the concept of trauma and mental illness. The character's perception of reality is permanently altered by their traumatic experiences. Now, let's talk about the games. In Sister Location, the Funtime animatronics are built by William Afton, specifically him and not Henry, because they're designed to lure and capture kids in their stomachs, which is very similar to how we see the Twisted animatronics functioning in this book. They were built by Afton to roam around and capture people in their stomachs. But when they're in Twisted mode, when their illusion chips are active, they look more like the Nightmare animatronics from FNAF 4, which have monster-like qualities like sharp teeth and claws. And we know that FNAF 4 is somehow physically connected to Sister Location. So could it be that the Nightmare animatronics in the game are actually the Funtimes using illusion chips to appear the way they do? Unfortunately, yes. In Ultimate Custom Night, one of Nightmare Fredbear's voice lines is,
"This time, there is more than an illusion to fear,"
suggesting that the nature of the Nightmare animatronics is that they're illusions. They're not actually as they appear. From the book, we know how the twisted animatronics are perceived is dependent on the viewer's preconceived notion of the Freddy's characters. So whether the FNAF 4 player is Bite Victim or Michael Afton, they would both see Freddy's characters in this way due to their trauma. So maybe that's what the connections between FNAF 4 and Sister Location have been trying to tell us all along, and we really were supposed to be using the books to solve the games. Forgetting about the games for a second, it's interesting to note that these chips are distinctly William's creation, which sets him apart from Henry as a creative. He's willing to cast ethics aside and build things that are designed to tamper with people's brains, and we haven't seen Henry make something like that yet. He made the Springlock suits, which are capable of harming people and are definitely ethically questionable, but it doesn't seem like the same level of evil as William's creations. Continuing the book, they're all sitting in Clay's car staking out the twisted animatronic graves, and while Charlie and the others are asleep, Clay is thinking about his wife Betty, which we know from the last book he has a somewhat troubled relationship with. We see a flashback where Clay is arguing with Betty, saying that she shouldn't be upset about him being consumed by his work because she's consumed by her work too, and it's something they have in common. But she says that whatever he's doing now is different. The use of the word consumed here is extremely important because it directly calls back to Clay's 3 options of dealing with trauma that we discussed at length earlier and have been keeping track of throughout the story. At first, it seemed like Clay took the first option of perpetually avoiding the subject and quote-unquote moving on, but it turns out that he's actually taking the second option and letting his trauma consume him, which means to take over and destroy his life. What this is actually showing us is that both of these 2 incorrect options are actually one and the same, because just ignoring the problem and not dealing with it will let it spiral out of control and consume you anyway. I actually love the use of consume in this flashback because not only are we learning more about Clay, but our understanding of the book's commentary on coping with trauma is deepening as we go. While he's thinking, the streetlight shatters, and they realize that they missed the animatronics and they're running loose now. They hear a scream coming from nearby, and when they go to find the source, Charlie runs into the wolf guy. Wolfie. Well, I'm gonna call him Wolfie, the wolf animatronic. Just like Foxy, he looks sick. Wolfie opens his chest and a woman falls out. She's injured, but Clay determines that she's still alive. I'm guessing that Wolfie let her go once he saw Charlie because he realized that he had the wrong person, but then he just walks away? What? Why isn't he going after Charlie? She's right there. We then get the most confusing, disorienting, and nonsensical transition in the entire book, possibly in the entire series. Charlie watches Wolfie walk away, and then she's just suddenly in class again, thinking about the twisted animatronics. So at first it seems like she's having a flashback while they're in the middle of the action scene, but no, this is a jump forward in time, and there's no the next day or later or anything like that. And then she starts having a flashback to her and Henry in her childhood in the middle of class. I literally had to check the page numbers to make sure my legally obtained digital copy wasn't just straight up missing pages. But no, this is the actual sequence of events that we get. This is an example of how the graphic novel medium can be misused, because if you don't have clear indications of the progression of time and how each scene is leading into each other, it becomes incomprehensible. Anyway, in the Henry flashback, we see him giving Charlie a new robot toy frog he made for her, but she doesn't like it because its big eyes freak her out. Henry starts taking it apart, saying he's gonna make her something better instead, but she cries out for him not to hurt him. So she is feeling this deeper connection to the robots than Henry is, who's just seeing them as disposable objects to be made and remade at will, which is very much in line with how we've seen both him and William characterized as creators in the series. After the flashback, she leaves class and runs into John outside, who tells her that the woman from the previous night is gonna be okay, and that Clay has a plan to fight the Twisted Ones tomorrow. So Charlie and John are free to go on another date. But of course, Charlie has other plans that she's not telling John about. She's gonna go deal with them herself because she knows it's her they're after, and she doesn't want to keep putting everyone else in danger. She thinks that the illusion ship made John sick, but it sings a song to her, which is very peculiar. She thinks about how Sammy was calling out to her, and she felt his presence more than ever before at her old house, which kind of makes it seem like she's going back there, but instead she goes to a random show house somewhere, which may be one of the places on the map they determined the Twisted Ones were going next, but it seems kind of random. She also brings Theodore, her robot bunny head, and tells him that she needs all the support she can get, which is ironic because she's literally refusing the support of everyone just going out on her own. She arrives at the show house and goes into the bedroom, and she tells Sammy that she's coming. So it seems like she's gonna let herself get captured by a twisted animatronic so they can take her to wherever she needs to be to find answers. So instead of waiting for them to find her and possibly killing other random people in the process, she's taking control of the situation and facing her fears, which is a cool development for her. Meanwhile, John is waiting for Charlie at Thai restaurant, and when she doesn't arrive after a bit, he calls Clay and asks if he's heard from her recently, so they're probably both gonna end up going after her. We cut back to Charlie, and she's fallen asleep waiting for the Twisted Ones to arrive, and sure enough, they do. This part where she knows they're here and she's just anticipating them to attack is actually kind of suspenseful. It's very similar horror to the first FNAF game where you're just sitting there and waiting for the animatronics to pop out at you. At first she doesn't know how many there are, but it turns out to just be Freddy, and he eats her. John and Clay pull up to the scene and find Theodore, so they know Charlie was here, but that she got taken. They drive down the path the map predicted they would be on, and they run into Jessica because John apparently also called her, so that's cool. Jessica is angry at Charlie for giving herself up, and she can't believe that it was actually a plan, that it was a logical decision she made for herself. She thinks there's just something wrong with her. We're seeing the unfortunate side of their friendship, where Jessica does truly want to protect her and make sure she's okay, but she doesn't think she's capable of making healthy decisions for herself. She immediately assumes that this couldn't have been planned and that Charlie is just acting completely irrationally. And while it may be true that she is being unpredictable, Jessica is inadvertently taking that autonomy to make decisions away from her. The book is once again hitting on that very common issue faced by mentally ill people in their relationships, and it's one that's central to Charlie's character. They try thinking of ways to find Charlie, and John suggests that they ask the original Freddy's animatronics for help, since they turned out to be friendly at the end of the last book. Clay reveals that he knows where they are because he kept them in his basement. They go to his house and he's in full divorced dad mode. Betty has left his ass and the house is just a total mess. He tells them that he brought all the animatronics home with him when they were clearing out the mall for demolition, and he kept them in the basement and checked on them every night when Betty was asleep, until she eventually found out and left him. So that's what they were arguing about in the flashback we saw earlier. Also, just as we predicted based on the use of the word consume from that flashback, Clay was never actually able to move on from Freddy's in the way that he told Charlie he did, and we're now seeing the consequences of that. His unresolved trauma is consuming his life, damaging his closest personal relationship. Clay's arc so far is the best written thing of this entire trilogy because he laid out a clear philosophy with those three options we keep coming back to, and his actions in the story are demonstrating the flaws of that philosophy to the reader. He thinks dealing with trauma is a binary choice between leaving it in the past or letting it consume you, and as he learns the folly of that way of thinking, we the reader learn along with him and come to a greater understanding about life in general, which is what fiction is supposed to do. So we'll see if they stick the landing and follow through with this arc as the story continues. Also, there's the obvious metaphor of Clay keeping the animatronics in the basement, like he's keeping his problems literally concealed from everyone, which ends up backfiring because Betty eventually finds out anyway. They go down and start talking to the robots, trying to see if the kids' spirits are still conscious and active in there. John weirdly asks Freddy if Michael is still in there, like, does he know that Golden Freddy is Michael? Also, come to think of it, where is Golden Freddy? It's possible he's just around but not physically manifesting, or he's somehow possessing all of the suits too. I'm not sure. The animatronics suddenly wake up and they look really silly because they have like angry eyebrows, which I think is really funny, and John hurriedly tells them about the situation with Charlie. They come out of the basement really aggressively, so they're not sure if they're after them again or not, but they bust through the front door and leave, so presumably they understood what John was saying and they're on their way to go help Charlie. We then cut to Charlie and she's inside of Twisted Freddy getting transported somewhere. She's trapped and she has to be extremely careful not to trip any of the spring locks that are already digging into her. This part and the next scene of her in the suit are genuinely horrifying. Just the idea of waking up in a moving death trap that doesn't care about your safety at all and having to be perfectly still as to not die gruesomely is very spooky, and the illustrations do a good job of conveying how small and uncomfortable of a space it is. We cut back to Clay, John, and Jessica running through the woods trying to find the original animatronics that just escaped, so I guess they think they'll lead them to Charlie. As they're running, they come across a dark, shadowy figure with the appearance of Freddy, and they think it wants them to follow it. Since we've played the games, we know that this is Shadow Freddy. This is by far the weirdest and least explicable connection to the games in the entire Silver Eyes trilogy, and I don't know what it means. We know that Shadow Freddy tells the other animatronics to follow him in the FNAF 3 minigames that occur between each night. He leads them to William to be dismantled, so it's unclear if he's working with William to do whatever he's doing, or he's working against him because he knows that dismantling the animatronics will free their souls. In this case, it seems more clear-cut that he's leading them to Charlie to help her, so he's on the side of good. I could go on and on about what this means for the games and what Shadow Freddy is supposed to be and Midnight Motorists, but since I've been reading this book so closely, I think I have a much better explanation based on what has just occurred up to this point. The plot needed the characters to find Charlie, but Scott and Kira literally wrote themselves into a corner and realized they had no sensible way of doing that, so they just lazily threw Shadow Freddy in to take care of that problem. Like, Clay, John, and Jessica couldn't use the map to find exactly where Charlie was now or where she was going. They got the animatronics to help, but they couldn't just follow them because, as you'll see, they need to go off screen and come back later. So the story literally did not give them a logical way to meet up with Charlie again. Hence, Shadow Freddy just shows up and does it for them, and we never speak of it again. As much as I hate to say it, it's not hidden game lore, it's just terrible writing. Thankfully, we cut back to Charlie waking up inside of Twisted Freddy again, and this time she tries to escape by carefully wriggling out of the suit without tripping the spring locks, and it's extremely tense and uncomfortable. She escapes and finds out that Freddy has taken her to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, but it's not the one we know from the last book in the abandoned mall. It's a weird version that Charlie's never seen before. She looks around and notices that the arcade games look untouched, so she thinks nobody's been here before. So this was just a Freddy's that was never open to the public. As she's exploring around, she's feeling a strange headache but doesn't know what's causing it, and she suddenly hears a voice say, "Hello?" And it sounds like a child's voice. She then sees a pair of eyes looking at her from under the table, but when she goes for a closer look, there's nothing there. For some reason, there's a waterfall here, and it's not just a result of the building being damaged or anything because there's gas cans to keep it running, so it's an intentional waterfall, which is very weird. She eventually finds the carousel, and then frickin' 2 balloon boys pop out and start chasing her around. Between the carousel, the water-based attraction, and the balloon children, this kind of seems like the FNAF 2 restaurant, but there was also a carousel in the first restaurant in the Silver Eyes, so it might just be a coincidence. Maybe it's drawing inspiration from the FNAF 2 restaurant, but it's not supposed to be telling us anything about it in the games. Suddenly the floor is warping and she's surrounded by a sea of balloon boys. And at first she thinks Sammy is amongst them, but then she realizes that something's not right, and she may be under the influence of the illusion chips again. She hides under the tables and suddenly comes face to face with Sammy, but he's obviously not really there. She's just tweaking. She ends up in a closet with a bunch of costumes and animatronics, and the Freddy in there turns out to be Twisted Freddy. So she scrambles around trying to avoid him while repeating that she's trapped and she needs to get out. Another instance of the Charlie trapped motif. Eventually she runs into John and the others, but she's still paranoid and not sure if they're real. Jessica figures out that the lights in the building are emitting the high-pitched illusion tone and tells Clay to shoot them out. And he does because he's just a freaking badass, dude. All the crazy nonsense stops and Charlie realizes that they are actually real and there to rescue her. For some reason, she feels the need to explain again how the illusion technology works, even though she already did that, and we the reader have a complete understanding of them by now, but she drops another banger in the process.
This whole place is an illusion. It's twisted somehow.
We then get another speech bubble mistake where the authors somehow yet again switch around Charlie and Jessica's dialogue. And I just don't know how this happens so often. It's such a blatant mistake. Charlie says, "Charlie, where are they? The big ones." And then Jessica says, "I don't know, my head is still spinning." So no, that doesn't make any sense. Why is Charlie asking herself that question aloud and then Jessica answering her? They just screwed up here again. It's insanely bad. Charlie asks Clay how they found her, and Clay says they followed, and then Twisted Freddy randomly bursts through the wall and conveniently interrupts them so they don't have to unpack Shadow Freddy at all, just to rub it in that the story makes no sense. I don't remember if I mentioned it earlier, but just like all the other Twisted fellas, Twisted Freddy looks frickin' awesome. He's got a lot of elements of Nightmare Fredbear, especially the stomach mouth and the kind of, for lack of a better word, Jabba the Hutt-like physique. But he has the extra details of some mold or foaming slime kind of growing out of him, and I like that a lot. The Twisted designs in this book are just peak. Clay shoots the chip, and we see that this isn't the same Twisted Freddy as the one that took Charlie. This is just a blank robot from the pizzeria. So the one that took Charlie and the other Twisted fellas are still out there. Just when we thought the monster designs couldn't get any more peak, Twisted Bonnie shows up, and just look at him, dude. He has, like, mandibles. I can't decide which one is my favorite, guys. Anyway, it's not just Bonnie, it's Wolfie too, my goat. And of course, the big reveal, it's William. They don't care about you. I'm the one who brought you here. You have something that belongs to me.
Impossible. Dave?
Don't call me that. I haven't been Dave for a long time. William Afton, then, of Afton Robotics? Wrong again. I've accepted the new life that you gave me. You've made me one with my creation. My name is Springtrap. I'm more than Afton ever was, and far more than Henry. Ever since Charlie remade me, set me free to my destiny, I've been master of all these creatures. See? All the animatronics are linked together, a system designed to control the choreography for the shows. Now I control the system. I control the choreography. All this belongs to me. I owe you both another debt of gratitude as well. I was imprisoned in that tomb beneath the stage, but then you freed me. I won't hurt your friends, but I need something from you.
You have to be kidding.
So not only did he see Dave as a character he was playing, but to an extent he also saw William as one too. And he feels like Springtrap is the truest expression of himself, which makes sense based on how he was characterized in the Silver Eyes. He was happiest when he got to be in the Spring Bonnie suit, and now he's literally merged with it. Him and the suit are one. His explanation for how he controls the animatronics is kind of half-baked and doesn't really make any sense. Like, if he was able to control them since before Charlie and Jessica accidentally freed him, then couldn't he just make them free him? Whatever, just go with it. We're almost there, guys. He also says that he needs something from Charlie while he's creepily touching her face, which we already knew since that's what the Twisted ones were after, but he's still not exactly revealing why. You never know when a corpse may wander out of the shadows wearing a rabbit suit. After dropping that incredible banger of a line, Clay shoots him and they run away. The Twisted fellas chase them around, and they frickin' burn them up with the gas that was pointed out earlier. As they're running away, Charlie starts feeling Sammy's pull again, and kind of runs ahead away from the rest of the group. And she ends up in like a cave of blue glowy mushrooms, so for some reason, the Freddy's is underground. Springtrap pops out and grabs her, just like in the ending of the Silver Eyes, but this time Charlie's able to elbow him in the stomach and get away because she's been doing sit-ups, and she's stronger now than she was before. So we finally get a really cheesy payoff to the sit-ups line, but it's so cheesy and silly, and it actually ties into the themes of the book, so I kind of like it. Meanwhile, the rest of the gang are cornered by the Twisted fellas, and when all hope seems lost, the original animatronics show up and epically destroy the Twisted ones. And this is literally the ending of the FNAF 2 movie. As I read these books, it's becoming more and more clear that this really is the ultimate version of the story as Scott envisioned it, and the Silver Eyes novels was just the first attempt at executing it, and now the movies are the second attempt. And that actually makes me so worried for the third movie, and once we get to the third book, you'll be extremely worried too. We cut back to Charlie, and she's still fighting Springtrap one-on-one, and she tricks him into falling onto some cave spikes. While he's lying there bleeding, she asks him for answers about Sammy. Why did he take him instead of her? And then we get the ultimate epic reveal. I didn't take him. I took you. Oh my god, guys. What does that mean? Well, I guess you'll have to stick around for the third and final book coming up in a sec. The others catch up to Charlie and tell her that they have to get out because the place is collapsing or something. And of course, William slips away once again. And John says they can deal with him another day, but they have to survive this one first. So true, John. They make it out and end up in the hidden room Charlie and John found in Henry's house earlier in the book, with the holes in the ground. This really freaks Charlie out, and she starts feeling the pull to Sammy even stronger. But John just wants to get out and not investigate further. Charlie doesn't go along with him and instead goes towards a big door, which she feels like Sammy is behind. She thinks it's the door from her visions. In these panels, we get a really nice visualization of Charlie's dilemma, not just in this moment, but throughout the entire book. In front of her is John, and going with him is the first option of moving on from her past. But behind her is the door where she thinks Sammy is, which represents the second option of refusing to move on and ending up being consumed. As we know already, both of these options are a false dichotomy, and the third option of processing and coming to terms with the trauma is the only real path. But that path hasn't presented itself to her yet. She goes to the door, but John pulls her away and tells her that he loves her, which convinces her to stay with him and move away from the door. I don't think it's necessarily because she loves John in the exact same way that he loves her, but more so that she just learns that her life is valuable. She has to be there for her friends and can't just sacrifice herself to her trauma. But as John is leading her away, the wall bursts open and Twisted Freddy grabs her and frickin' eats her. She gets literally consumed before John or anyone can save her. So it seems like she was doomed either way. Pretending like I haven't read the next book, I'm gonna guess that she'll end up okay and be eventually able to make that third choice, but she just wasn't able to yet. Some officers that Clay apparently called arrive to help them get out, but John obviously doesn't want to leave Charlie, so he fights past them and gets one last look at Twisted Freddy before they pull him out again. And he sees a woman who looks just like Charlie kneeling over Freddy holding Charlie's hand, which will be explained sort of in the next book. But for now, we just know that she's probably still alive in some way. The officers get them all out, and the whole house just frickin' explodes, because that's always what happens at the end of these books, apparently. We then cut to some time later at the diner from the first book, only they've removed the banner with the terrible font, which I think is symbolic of how the artists of this book removed a lot of the terrible ideas from the last book. Jessica and John are discussing Charlie's death, and while Jessica thinks she's still alive and wants to go search for her, John wants her to stop talking about it and just move on. So they're both kind of grieving in different ways, but neither of them really know what to do. Artie from university shows up and asks about what happened. And hilariously, his first reaction upon hearing that Charlie died is to say that they were just starting to date. Like, come on, bruh. Marla from the first book also shows up and asks what happened. And as John explains, he says that her Aunt Jen was there, but we the reader know what Aunt Jen looks like, and she does not look like that. So I guess John is just assuming that because he's never seen Aunt Jen, and Charlie was clearly dead for all he knew. Just at that moment, Charlie shows up wearing lipstick and a red dress, and while Jessica and Marla run out to hug her excitedly, John stays in the restaurant and says, "That's not Charlie." And that's the end of The Twisted Ones. I was thinking really hard about whether I enjoyed it more or less than The Silver Eyes, and I think that while The Twisted Ones was slightly better overall, they're both pretty bad for different reasons. As I talked about extensively, The Twisted Ones was much better illustrated, so that went a really long way in terms of making it enjoyable to read as a graphic novel, despite the several glaring mistakes that were really confusing. And I will also say that the characters were much more fleshed out and had much more interesting interpersonal dynamics with each other, especially Jessica and Charlie. John remains a very predictable and bland male love interest with not much going on at all, but the book definitely benefited from having less characters running around, because The Silver Eyes ended up having an excess amount of characters that did basically nothing. I said already, but Clay was peak. He was very interesting to follow, and his arc was perfectly in line with the themes of the story, so he was just great. The story of The Silver Eyes is very slow and boring, but the story of The Twisted Ones was an absolute slog. Somehow even slower and more boring than the first one. It took forever to actually get to the monsters that the book is named after, and there was just so little in the way of interesting stuff happening before then. It really did just feel like we were waiting to get there. The worst part of this book for me, though, is just how little sense the plot made at some points, in a way that would completely derail the story for me and make me feel like I was going insane. I'm not going to rehash all of that here, but Charlie's motivation for constantly lying about everything was not clear, and it made her constant lying really annoying because it felt like it was just slowing everything down. And there were so many moments where it felt like the writers forgot what the characters' traits were, so a lot of the story really had the vibe of it being made up as it went along. I liked the themes, and I think the book did a pretty good job getting them across, and that's definitely what I'm most looking forward to going into the next book. I want to see if they stick the landing and wrap up this story in a way that incorporates the running themes they've been setting up. I don't, unfortunately, care much about what happens to these characters. With all that said, let's move on to the third and final graphic novel in the series, The Fourth Closet. Five Nights at Freddy's, The Fourth Closet, the graphic novel, is the graphic novel adaptation of the third Five Nights at Freddy's novel, The Fourth Closet, and it was published in 2021. It was written by Scott Cawthon and Kira Breed-Wrisley, adapted by Christopher Hastings, and illustrated by Deanna Camero, with colors by Ava de la Cruz and letters by Mike Fiorentino. The legally obtained digital copy of the book that I have says it's based on the best-selling series Fazbear Frights, which is definitely wrong. As we've done with the other two books, let's talk about the art of The Fourth Closet. If you just skip forward to this part and want to hear my explanation about why illustration is so important for the visual medium, go ahead and rewind to the beginning of the Silver Eyes section to hear that. The art of The Fourth Closet is, I would say, about on par with that of the Twisted Ones, maybe slightly worse. It's a different illustrator again, but I would say that the character designs are very similar, which is not a bad thing because they look fine. We'll get to how the monster designs shape up as we move along. The backgrounds are similar overall too, but we're still unfortunately getting way too many of those solid color gradient panels. The colors and the shading are about the same, very bright and eye-catching, but we're not getting as much of that grainy texture that made the Twisted Ones feel more stylized and less flat. I would actually say that The Fourth Closet is closer on the flatness spectrum to the Silver Eyes. I would also say that the panel layout is more similar to the Silver Eyes. It's just less creative overall and doesn't make very good use of page space. It's a lot of just simple grids and stuff like that. We hardly get any full page spreads, but we still definitely get more creative use of the graphic novel medium than the Silver Eyes. The main thing is that it is overall very nice to look at, so like the last book, I would say it is a worthwhile graphic novel adaptation. Now, let's get into the story of The Fourth Closet. We open with a flashback to the climax of the last book from John's perspective, where Charlie is getting eaten by Twisted Freddy. He tries to save her, but the mysterious Sammy door opens, and behind it is the silhouette of the new red dress version of Charlie we saw at the end of the book. We don't know yet if she is or isn't Charlie, but when we last saw her, John called her not Charlie, so I'm gonna call her not Charlie to avoid unnecessary confusion. He snaps out of it, and it's revealed that he's been having this flashback in the middle of his construction job, which we learned about briefly in the last book. Hilariously, his supervisor immediately fires him on the spot for dangerously not paying attention to the job, and John doesn't even argue, he just accepts it and leaves. So it looks like this story is going to be from John's perspective rather than Charlie's, which I'm not exactly pumped for because John is one of the most boring characters in the series, but I'm open to it. Maybe the writers will take this opportunity to flesh him out as a character more. He leaves his job and starts walking down the side of the road. He's a poor little meow meow, and he's thinking about how it's been 6 months since Charlie seemingly died, and he hasn't been doing anything outside of work since then. I know this internal monologue is supposed to sound like fragmented thoughts, but they really just make me laugh because he just sounds like a simpleton. Go to work, go home, buy food sometimes, for 6 months. Now, no job, no work. All of a sudden, I kid you not, a purple car swerves on the road and starts bombing it towards him, and he actually thinks to himself that it's William Afton. We are not midnight motoring only 6 pages into the book. Nope, we're not doing it. It turns out to just be Jessica, who happened to be randomly passing by. She tells him that Carlton is coming back from New York and invites him to a get-together that night at his dad Clay's house. But John skeptically asks who else is gonna be there, and Jessica knows he's talking about not Charlie. She tells him that she misses him and that he has to talk to her sometime, but John doesn't want to. No, I don't. I don't know who that is, but it isn't Charlie. Charlie's dead.
Stop it. You're hurting her. Don't you understand? After what she went through? It's insane, John. I don't know what that night did to you, but I know what it did to Charlie. But I don't think any of it hurt as badly as you refusing to speak to her.
I saw her die.
No, you didn't. I've seen her. I've talked to her. It is her. And this, the thing you're doing, that's what's killing her. Please come tonight.
Maybe.
Good enough for me. I'll see you there.
I said maybe. This is being set up as John's main internal conflict at the beginning of the story. Charlie's death was a horrible, traumatic event for him, and now he's facing the same choice that Charlie and Clay were in the last book. To leave it in the past / let it consume him, or to try to resolve it within himself. John wants to leave the part of his life that Charlie was in the past, so he's choosing to avoid not Charlie and just fill his life with work and try to not think about it. As a result, he's not dealing with the unresolved trauma from Charlie's death he's still carrying. As we learned in the last book, this is not the correct path to take. So we'll see if John does end up changing direction and facing his trauma by going to this party tonight. He goes home and talks to Theodore, Charlie's robot rabbit head, and he says he just doesn't know why he hasn't thrown him away yet. Considering what we just went over, him keeping Theodore is a metaphor for him still holding on to Charlie. He hasn't thrown him away because he still has hope that Charlie will come back. He's not able to just completely leave her in the past, which explains why he's conflicted about whether or not to go to the party and see not Charlie. He turns on the TV and there's a guy interviewing some clowns and asking about a grand opening. I wonder if that's important. He lays in bed and goes back and forth about if Charlie could still be alive or not. And we get this really cool page that's very similar to one of the first pages of the Twisted ones, where Charlie is being haunted by her experience at Freddy's, and now we have John being haunted by her. Very cool. He decides not to go, but of course we cut to him pulling up to Clay's house later that evening. As he's walking in, Clay comes out and greets him, and when he takes John inside, he notices that his house is clean. It's not a divorced dad mess like it was in the last book. John asks if Betty came back, but Clay says no, she hasn't, but life still goes on. I am so glad that this book gave us this detail, because it continues Clay's narrative arc from the last book and shows us that he eventually did take the third option. The hardest option, but the only healthy option. He processed his trauma and came to terms with it. He's not obsessing over Freddy, he's not waiting for Betty to come back. He's radically accepted the situation for what it is and started to live his life. Since Clay's arc was always running ahead of the others in the last book, I'm gonna assume that the same is happening here and that this is indicative of the other characters being given the opportunity to make the same choice he did. So we'll see if that happens. Marla, Jessica, and Carlton come down to greet John. He hilariously asks if Lamar is around, as if the last book didn't just completely forget about him, and of course, he's not around. Carlton asks Jessica what's been up with her, and she tells them that Charlie abruptly moved out of the dorm without telling her where she was going, which does sort of sound like something Charlie would have done in the last book, but it is drawing a little suspicion. Clay calls John into the kitchen to make sure he's doing alright. God, he is just such a dad. I love him so much. He tells him that he's putting himself through unnecessary heartache by refusing to accept not Charlie as the real thing. And that makes John real mad, so he stomps off and leaves. Oh, harumph. As he's leaving, he runs into not Charlie, and it's really awkward. He's cold to her, and she starts to cry because he doesn't think it's really her, and we see in John's internal monologue that his doubts about her not being real are coming up to the surface. Suddenly, he's questioning if maybe she just grew up, and he thinks about how traumatic that night must have been for her considering how much it affected him. He wants to reach out to her and connect with her again, but suddenly a cloud passes over the moon, and he gets a tiny glimpse of her shiny, inhuman looking eyes, and he snaps back to his conviction. Almost got me, he thinks to himself. The use of the moon as a visual in this scene is really cool because it's literally a light in the darkness. John's life is dark. He's in the process of abandoning hope that Charlie could still be alive, but under the moonlight he gets a short respite from that darkness and allows himself to feel hope again. But of course the moonlight is only temporary and it gets blocked out by a dark cloud, killing his hope once again. But that moment of clarity also helps him to come back to his senses. He asks her if she remembers the last thing he said to her before she got trapped in the suit, which we know was "I love you." This panel is super weird and probably a mistake. "I love you" should be in the thought bubble and this dialogue should be in the speech bubble because he's not revealing that to her, he's asking her to test her. I guess we're not free of the random formatting errors just yet. She doesn't remember, and John decides again that it's definitely not her. He starts to leave and she asks if they can meet tomorrow and talk more. He agrees, but he thinks to himself that she didn't have Charlie's eyes as he drives away. Jessica comes out to comfort not Charlie and says that John doesn't mean to hurt her, he's just traumatized and needs more time. They both go back inside and have some more small talk with Carlton and Marla. And Carlton mentions that the rubble from Charlie's old house was recently cleared out and taken to the junkyard, which is important. Not Charlie is sad, so it seems like she cares more about being friends with John again than everyone else who already accepts her. Guys, I'm gonna take a wild swing here. I don't think Not Charlie is Charlie. I think she's a robot or something. So now the question is, how long will the book take to actually reveal that to the characters, and will that amount of time be enough to test my patience? We cut to the next day and we see the junkyard that Carlton was talking about. The guy who works in the office there, Bob, is talking on the phone with somebody he refers to as Officer about not being able to find anyone, which is strange. Suddenly there's a tall shadowy figure with brown hair and a red dress and red lipstick. Guys, it's not Charlie. I don't have to pretend, right? This is not Charlie. She intimidates him and demands that he show her where the scrap that was taken from Charlie's old house ended up, and we learn that Bob found something unusual in that scrap, something that Not Charlie describes as sounding like a screaming child, or several screaming children. So that sounds like maybe Charlie, which would make sense for Not Charlie to be looking for, but it's not totally clear yet. We cut to later that day and we see John still going back and forth in his head about Charlie still being alive. This time he's considering if it could have something to do with Sammy, so maybe Not Charlie is actually Sammy or something like that. As he thinks, he starts to consider more things about Charlie's past that just don't add up and have never been fully explained up to this point. While he's thinking, Theodore startles him by jumping to life and kind of vibrating, which he says has never happened before. At that moment, Clay arrives and starts to ask him what he knows about Charlie's Aunt Jen, because he thought he saw her that night and Clay wants to know more about what happened. He also tells John that they found some scary things in the wreckage, maybe the things that Not Charlie was after in the junkyard, and because of that, he's not ready to declare William Afton dead. And I mean, yeah, you literally saw him escape before the place blew up, but sure. Basically, he wants John to get some of this info out of Not Charlie and report it back to him, which John calls morally ambiguous but doesn't say he's not gonna do it. Theodore, still on the floor, then starts murmuring, which John says is also new. We cut to his not date with Not Charlie at Thai restaurant, the iconic location from the first date in the last book. He's early, so he has a little wander around town first, but as he's walking, he passes by Circus Baby's Pizza, which is new to these books, but not new to us who have played the FNAF games. Circus Baby's Pizza World, as it's called in the games, was the sister location of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, and it was the pet project of William Afton that featured his own creations, the Funtime animatronics, which were built to kidnap children. So when we see it pop up here, we should know that William is probably back. Big surprise. We also know that it was just open because it has a clown theme, and the TV interview earlier was hinting at a clown themed thing opening soon. John is intrigued by it because it's so similar to Freddy's, so he goes inside and looks around until an employee wearing a shirt that says Baby Circus tells him to get out. But John has already gotten the vibe that something is not right. We then cut to Jessica at her home putting groceries away when an extremely creepy shadow figure appears in the doorway and scares the pants off of her, but it turns out to just be not Charlie. I love how she looks in this panel so much, like she is just not right. Reminds me of the bent neck lady from Haunting of Hill House, which absolutely freaked me out when I first watched it. Not Charlie tells Jessica that she's worried about her upcoming date with John because he doesn't seem to like her new look, and she wants her to help her pick out a new outfit. This is a direct callback to the Twisted Ones where Charlie asks Jessica the same thing and she's super excited about it. So it's almost like Not Charlie knows that this is an easy way to manipulate Jessica, but this time she doesn't go for it. Instead, she tells Not Charlie that she has to be mindful of how it feels for John, because he's also been through a lot and may just need some time. Not Charlie then tries to slyly coax the answer to John's question about what he said to her that night out of her, which is really sinister because she's taking advantage of Jessica's supportive wingman nature, and this actually sketches her out a bit. After Not Charlie leaves, Jessica realizes that John is testing her to see if she's real. But hold on, now I feel like I'm being freaking joshed, because right before that, we get another panel where they switch Charlie and Jessica's dialogue. They followed me from the last book. Why do they keep doing this? Anyway, we cut back to Thai restaurant and Not Charlie has arrived. John sees if she can remember the name of the zombie movie they saw on their first date, and she does. But then there's this panel that has no dialogue, but it really looks like it should. Like their mouths are open and they're in the middle of a conversation. And in the next panel, it feels like we're missing something. John says something was his fault, but like, what was your fault, dude? I can't believe they just forgot to add the dialogue to this panel. Like, between that and the last mistake, we are reaching insane levels of laziness in the QA department. Moving past that, they talk a bit, it's sort of awkward, and Not Charlie tells him that she still can't remember what he told her that night. And she starts getting kind of antsy about him telling her, even ripping her napkin while she's asking, which is a great detail because it looks like a cloth napkin and those don't rip easily, so she might possess some kind of inhuman strength. John asks her how she managed to get away unharmed, and she says that she didn't, but she's talking about emotional damage. She says that her whole life has been haunted by hurricane, and that she needed to get as far away from it as possible and become someone else. So she's being very vague and still not exactly answering his question. She refers to his Charlie as a naive, pathetic little girl, which gives away the fact that she has a lot of resentment for that version of herself. They talk more about the fact that John thinks she's not real, and he brings up that he thought she might actually be Sammy, to which Not Charlie angrily insists that Sammy is dead. If we know anything about Charlie, it's that she would never say that about Sammy. That's like her whole thing. Sammy isn't dead. She then not so subtly tries to get John to tell her where Aunt Jen is, and it's so obvious at this point that even John is pointing out that her story doesn't make any sense. John says he doesn't know where she is, and they eventually leave the restaurant. I'm gonna take a beat here to talk about why exactly this Not Charlie plot is just not working for the story at all. We, the reader, know that this is not the real Charlie because it has been overtly stated in the text. It's not supposed to be an actual mystery for us. The best comparison I could think of to make this point is the episode Utopia from the TV show Doctor Who. You're lucky I've made it this far in the video without mentioning Doctor Who, okay? In that episode, there's an eccentric old professor named Yana, and at the end of the episode, spoiler alert for a 2007 episode of Doctor Who if you care, he's revealed to actually be the main villain from the show, the Master in disguise. This is an impactful, crazy reveal not only to the viewers, but to the characters of the show, because it's kept a mystery throughout the entire episode. But the genius of that episode and why the reveal works so well is that it slowly builds tension across its runtime by dropping subtle hints that this old guy isn't who he seems. So it's intense because we, the audience, know something's wrong, but the other characters don't, and we're screaming at them to look out because we know something bad is coming. The tension peaks when one of the protagonists, Martha, #Justice for Martha, you deserve so much better, queen, figures out that something's wrong before everyone else does, and she has to keep her cool around this freaky old guy, knowing that they're all in imminent danger from him. By the time she tells the others, it's too late and they've fallen into his trap. So that's an instance where this character in disguise plot works very well, but that is not what's going on in the fourth closet. From basically page 1, we the reader know that this isn't Charlie, and John is already onto her from the very start, so there is absolutely no tension where there should be. If she was dressed exactly the same and acted exactly the same way as Charlie, save for a few tiny subtle moments where she lets the mask slip and gives us reason to worry that something is going to go terribly wrong, we would actually be in suspense and constantly guessing about what's actually going on and what's going to happen. But instead, we just know what's going on from the start, so instead it's just boring. We're just having to slog through all of these pages and pages of John going back and forth about her being Charlie or not Charlie or whatever, just waiting for the reveal to happen so we can get on with the story. So far, this is the most challenging book to get through, and that's really saying something. Anyway, moving on, their date ends and they're standing outside the restaurant. Not Charlie asks John if he wants to see a movie like they did last time, and he says no and takes off. As he's leaving, he runs into a bunch of clowns like the ones on TV, and they really freak him out. He gets to his car and sees an ad for circus babies that says, "Come dressed as a clown to eat free." So maybe these guys are employees or just customers standing around in the street for some reason. John goes to Clay's house, and even though it's late, Clay is ready for his arrival, coffee in hand. He's fixed and reinforced his door, he's peeking out the curtains, he is locked in. He asks John if he learned anything important from his date with not Charlie, and John tells him that it seems like she's looking for Aunt Jen. Clay then slips us some juicy backstory about Charlie's life. He says that Henry never had a bad word to say about Charlie's mom, but she left him before they moved to Hurricane. And when Clay asked him about her, he said that she wouldn't know what to do with his little girl. So there's definitely something unusual that went on between Henry and Charlie's mom. Clay's also been holding on to the Ella doll after he found it in the wreckage of Charlie's old house, because not Charlie was suspiciously not interested in it. Yeah, we know, bro. Finally, before John leaves, Clay tells him about a new crop of missing kids in the town, and he says he feels like he's reliving the days of the original MCI back in the day. He tells John that if it does turn out to be Afton, he'll need him and Charlie to help. As John's leaving, Clay asks him if he wants to take his gun, but he adds that he's only joking, unless of course he needs it. I love Clay so much, dude. Anyone else with daddy issues who low-key wishes Clay was their papa, rise up in the comments. John walks to his car and sees a mysterious clown robot girl in the mist, who looks a lot like the mascot of Circus Baby's Pizza. When he gets in the car, he turns to look and she's not there anymore. Very spooky. We cut back to Clay and his oak-reinforced door gets broken down like it's nothing, and he's barely able to call the police before he gets whacked by some mysterious entity. Probably the scary clown lady we just saw. We cut to the next morning at John's house, and we see that Theodore's murmuring is evolving into actual speech. Shining star, silver reef, which sounds like a cryptic message that's gonna have to be decoded. John gets a phone call from the hospital, and they tell him that Clay is badly injured but in stable condition, and that he wants to see him. We then get a meanwhile transition to a mysterious location we've never seen with shadowy figures we don't know the identities of, but we can make pretty good guesses. It's the clown lady and a shriveled guy in a wheelchair, and they're working on some kind of operating table experiment. We can see from the silhouette that it looks kind of like some sort of animatronic.
It's moving.
Of course it is. Of course they are. Raise it 2 more degrees.
It looks like it's in pain.
I don't care. Do it.
They're afraid. You're at risk of destroying them.
No. They remember me as I used to be, and they can't be destroyed. They can only serve a greater purpose. They'll become something more, just like you once did. Success. Go. I have no more use for you now. And as for you, the police chief kept the animatronics hidden in his basement for quite some time. Perhaps he hid our final component there.
I checked. He didn't.
Then keep looking. So since this guy is a sadistic freak who knows a lot about animatronics, I'm gonna assume he's William Afton. And since the clown lady is looking around for stuff just like not Charlie, I'm gonna assume that she's not Charlie. They refer to the experiment on the table as they, which makes it seem like it's some kind of entity that houses multiple beings. They're using heat to melt down and extract some kind of molten liquid from this thing, and then inject that into a new animatronic, which we know from the games as Funtime Freddy. We also know from the games that this material is probably remnant, since it can be heated, extracted, and transferred across animatronics. Remnant is, for lack of a better term, soul goo, basically possessed metal in liquid form. We don't learn too much about it in the games, but based on the blueprints from FNAF 6 Insanity ending, we know that William Afton had a device that could extract, store it, and inject it. So he was probably doing some kind of experimentation with it, which would line up with what we see him doing here. We'll see what his goal ends up being later in the book. We cut to the hospital where Clay is, and John and Jessica are visiting him. He's in bad shape, but he's still conscious. He hands them an envelope and tells them it must have a maximum range, which is very cryptic. They open the envelope and find that it's full of photos of not Charlie, but she's blurred out for some reason. John is literally so dumb, it's hilarious. He goes, "Someone's been stalking us!" Like, no bro, Clay took those pictures. There's literally ones that are from inside his house. Jessica catches on right away, thankfully. Clay passes out again, and Marla and Carlton show up because John called them earlier. Carlton rightfully asks why Clay only called John and not him, his actual biological child. He likes John better than you, little bro. I don't know what to say. Not Charlie shows up and hilariously tries to stir the pot more and turn them against John because she just hates him. They're all awkwardly standing around in the hospital ward, and Jessica slyly makes up some excuses for her and John to leave because they have to talk business. John's a little slow on the uptake as always, but he catches on and they leave. On their way out, they run into a distraught woman who tells them that she came to see Clay because her son is missing, and the other cops weren't taking her seriously. They think that her ex-husband just took him in a custody battle. For some strange, bizarre reason, she uses the exact same phrase that Clay used when he was quoting Henry earlier. He wouldn't know what to do with him. Just like how Henry said Charlie's mom wouldn't know what to do with her. Considering what we learn Henry meant by this later, this is such a weird thing for this woman to say. It's almost definitely intentional because it's not just a regular phrase that people use when they're talking about kids in custody battles. John reassures her that Clay will find her son, and he and Jessica leave, acknowledging that it's up to them to find out what's going on now that Clay's down for the count. As they're walking out, John shows Jessica Theodore, and she thinks she understands part of his message because she knows that Silver Reef is a nearby town. So they decide to follow Theodore's call and drive there to see if they can find anything. We cut to later that night, and they've just arrived in Silver Reef. You may have noticed that Silver Reef uses the word silver, just like the silver eyes. But we found out that the silver eyes belong to William, and this place doesn't really end up having to do with that, so I think it's just a coincidence. They park and look around for a shining star, the other part of Theodore's riddle, and within seconds they see a house on a hill that has a star on its archway. You know what else is a house on a hill? The FNAF 4 house. But that's also definitely a coincidence, right? Let's just hope we don't see any more FNAF 4 imagery in this house, right guys? They drive up and knock on the door, and it turns out it's Aunt Jen's house. John tells her that they were called there by a message, but Aunt Jen says that she never sent them any message. But she does recognize Theodore, so she invites them in. So this is where Charlie grew up?
No. How is she? Does she also know about this message?
No, but we're trying to help her. Is there anything going on?
Charlie is my concern. She's my responsibility. Charlie's our friend. She's our concern too.
A friend of ours was taking pictures of Charlie, like he was stalking her, and we don't know why, because he was nearly murdered last night. He said something before he lost consciousness. It has to have a maximum range. Do you know what that means?
I know you mean well. I should tell you to go away, to forget her.
You're not going to tell us anything?
Secrets petrify you. You harden yourself against the world to keep them safe, but you keep them long enough, you discover one day you've turned to stone.
Listen, I may not know whatever your secrets are, but I know that girl isn't Charlie, or she's under some kind of influence. She isn't herself. So like we learned in the last book, the people in Charlie's life see her as someone they have to take care of, because Charlie struggles with mental illness and may not always be able to make good choices for herself. I think Aunt Jen personifies the maximalist version of that. She took care of Charlie. She dictated what she could and couldn't do. but she never gave her any real emotional support. So Charlie got all of the bad side of that dynamic and none of the good. Meanwhile, Jessica and John do still see her as their responsibility, as Jessica says here, but they also value Charlie as a person with autonomy. Although they could honestly stand to work on that a bit more if we're being honest. But still, it makes sense why Charlie chose to leave Aunt Jen and go live with Jessica instead. What Aunt Jen says about the nature of secrets in the scene also applies to Charlie, because she's always been a very secretive person, very reluctant to open herself up to others. And if Aunt Jen feels as though she's quote-unquote turned to stone by keeping secrets for too long, then that's probably how Charlie's gonna turn out too, unless she changes her ways. I think this theme of secrets goes hand in hand with Clay's 3 options for dealing with trauma that we keep coming back to over and over. Keeping yourself isolated from others and putting up walls with secrets is a form of letting your trauma consume you, because truly resolving it requires opening up to others. Suddenly there's a knock at the door and it's not Charlie. So Jessica and John hide in the back room while Aunt Jen greets her and tries to play it cool. In the back room, John keeps hearing Shining Star, Silver Reef over and over, but it's not coming from Theodore, it's coming from inside this box. And when he opens the box, it's Charlie inside. Not Charlie, the real Charlie. So, a few things. One, is this actually supposed to be telling us anything about the FNAF 4 box? Not just because it's also a box, but because it's in a lone house on a hill, and we see it right after Aunt Jen gave us that whole spiel about secrets? No, it's not. There's just no way to apply Charlie being in the box to the games that makes any sense at all. The game's version of Charlie isn't even in FNAF 4, unless she's the Fredbear plush, and having her be in the box doesn't reveal anything for the story. Yes, it's a coincidence, and yes, it's super annoying. 2, you know how we were just talking a bit ago about how this not Charlie plotline is just not working out at all because it's obvious from the start that she's not Charlie, and there's no suspense because we're all just waiting for the reveal? Well, imagine if instead of that, the writers made it an actual mystery to both the reader and the characters that actually had us guessing if it's her or not, and then the reveal suddenly comes at this moment when they find the real Charlie in this box while not Charlie is right in the other room, and now they have to play it cool in order to not get killed by her. That would be so much better. It would be suspenseful, thrilling, and it would actually give this moment weight. It would be the payoff to this mystery that's been keeping us guessing this whole time. But no, instead, my reaction is, thank God they finally found the real Charlie. Can we please move on with the story already? That was my reaction because this book is painfully boring. Anyway, not Charlie freaking kills Aunt Jen. She's looking for the real Charlie, by the way. I don't know if I said that. That's why she's here. And John and Jessica somehow escape from the back room and skirt off with Charlie in tow. They take her back to John's place, and Jessica wants to take her to the hospital because she's just laying there unconscious. John, for some reason, doesn't want to take her, I guess because the plot doesn't call for her to be separated from them again, and he's looking at a photo of Charlie as a kid that we saw in the last book. Jessica sees it, and they both notice how she looks a lot like the Ella doll, so John runs out to go get it from Clay's house. When John retrieves the Ella doll, he finds a chip in the bottom of her shoe that has Dave written on it, which is probably an illusion chip from the last book, but I'm not sure why it says Dave and not Afton Robotics, but we'll see, I guess. Speaking of Afton, we cut back to him and the clown lady / not Charlie in their hot goo lair, and he's waxing poetic in front of the fire about his true love, Henry. He says that anyone can discover a fire that's already burning as he has, referring to whatever he's currently extracting the remnant from, but Henry discovered a unique spark and created something truly different, which he thinks he didn't deserve. And whatever that thing is that Henry created is what he's been setting not Charlie after to go get for him. In the last book, William was programming the twisted animatronics to hunt down and capture Charlie, and we never found out exactly why he wanted her, but he did say that she has something that belongs to him at the end, so it's quite possible that whatever she has is the thing that Henry created. Not Charlie asks him if she's not enough, and he bluntly tells her that she's not. So it really seems like he somehow created not Charlie, but he's jealous of Henry. Not just because he created something better than her that he wants to replace her with, but because he's jealous that Henry was able to create it and he wasn't. This ties into a theme from the first book that was kind of moved to the background in the second, but it's now back in a big way. Creation as an expression of love. In the Silver Eyes, William said that he helped Henry to create, and that they both wanted to love. We learned that since William's creation was imbuing the souls of murdered children into Henry's animatronics, that his idea of love was seriously warped, and it looks like now we're seeing that idea come back again. If Henry created something truly unique, as he puts it, then Henry would have loved in a way that he never could, and he wants more than anything to be able to do that. We'll be able to fully unpack all of this once we find out exactly what it was that Henry created. For now, we know that Not Charlie is motivated to do William's bidding because she wants to be enough for him. She also wants to feel loved in a way. If her creator is William Afton, then it's no wonder she has daddy issues. We cut back to Jessica watching over Charlie, and she drops another one of my favorite lines in the series.
Too many people I care about are currently unconscious.
Like, yeah, girl, you really just stated exactly what's going on, didn't you? She thinks about what Clay meant by "it has a range," and she takes another look at the photos he gave them. She realizes that Not Charlie is blurry in every picture. John comes home, and they both figure out that she's blurry because she's actually a freaking clown robot using an illusion chip, which only works when she's within the maximum range. Except, what? Wasn't the whole thing with illusion chips that they emitted a noise that made you sick? That hasn't happened once in the book, dude. They better address that or I'm gonna be freaking peeved off. Just then, Not Charlie appears in the window, so John hurriedly shuts the blinds. I really like this panel. He just looks so silly and like, what is shutting the blinds gonna do? She already saw you and said hi. He goes to hide Charlie while Jessica lets Not Charlie in and tries to stall her. But she starts looking around and Jessica whispers to John to do something quick. He asks her if she wants to go out to dinner with him again, and that actually throws her off the scent and completely distracts her, seemingly because she's actually excited that John is interested in going out with her. I'm torn about this because on the one hand, I think it's really great characterization for Not Charlie. We just saw that she's constantly being told that she's not enough and is desperate for approval, so it makes a lot of sense why she may want to give up her mission in favor of actually getting treated like a person. And I like that that would actually excite her so much that she completely drops what she's doing. But on the other hand, as we'll see in like 2 pages, she doesn't end up following through with this sentiment. Like as soon as John shows up for the date, she's fully locked in on her mission again. So I don't know, maybe this is just dumb and not actually purposeful characterization at all. So she leaves and sometime after, Charlie wakes up. She's been dreaming about her as a child and being trapped. It's the same kind of recurring dream she's been having since the first book. Only this time we see her banging on the door she thought Sammy was behind in the last book. And next to it are the drawings of the 3 closets from her childhood bedroom. So it looks like the mysterious door is the 4th closet. When she wakes up, John is with her, and he's very happy to see her again and all that. He tells her that Marla's on her way to help since she's in pre-med and knows medical stuff. He also tells her about Not Charlie, and she thinks that she may have to do with William. John pulls up to their date, and he's got a hidden walkie-talkie so Jessica and Carlton can hear what's going on. It's not clear to us yet, but it seems like they have some kind of plan. He meets Not Charlie in there, and it looks like they're at Italian this time because there's bread and olive oil on the table, which doesn't make any sense because when they were planning the date, they agreed to meet at the same place as last time, which was clearly Thai restaurant, not Italian. But clearly the authors don't care about that nearly as much as I do, so let's just move on. Like I mentioned earlier, Not Charlie does not seem excited about the date at all because she starts interrogating him about Charlie immediately, and John can't even keep his cool for 2 seconds, which I actually find really endearing. I may have my problems with John being a flat character who is not interesting to follow for the course of an entire book, but he does have a pure heart, and I can appreciate that. I also really like how he threatens her here. I don't know what it will take to show these people what you really are, but I can try all sorts of things before you make it out that door. I'll start with this glass of soda, then I'll try a chair over the back of your head. We'll see where we go from there. Like, he does not sound tough at all, but he really thinks he's doing something here. She gets up, kisses him on the cheek, and pays the bill, which absolutely shocks Jessica and Carlton. This is a very old-fashioned cliche where, like, the woman paying the bill is her, like, asserting her dominance over the man, which is painfully stupid, and I hate it so much. But wait, it gets even worse, because watching this happen literally turns Carlton on. I know it's supposed to be funny, and it is kind of funny how Jessica is like, why do I even bring you along? But I seriously just hate this trope of platonic platonic male-female friendships in media, when even though they're just friends, the man is still sexually attracted to the woman for no real reason. Like, there's not a love triangle or romantic tension, it's just creepy. Like Scott, and I'm blaming Scott for this one even though there are multiple authors, can't just let a man and a woman be platonic friends for the duration of a story. He has to make it weird. Jessica tells Carlton that she has an idea, which means that they actually didn't really have a plan this whole time, so like, why did they all come here exactly? But her plan is to hide in Not Charlie's trunk as she drives away in order to follow her and find out more info. So she does that and ends up at Circus Baby's Pizza. She runs out of the car and tries to make it into the building, but she gets stopped by Not Charlie, who jump scares her. She blacks out, and when she wakes up, she's tied to a chair and Not Charlie is staring at her creepily. Since it's clear at this point that she's the same character as the Circus Baby's Pizza mascot, and I'm tired of saying Not Charlie over and over, I'm gonna start referring to her as Baby from now on. Let's talk about Baby's design really quick. I think she looks cool sometimes, like when her faceplates are open and she looks absolutely geeked, but a lot of the time, I think she just looks very silly. That may also be because we get so many panels of her just acting like a normal person and talking to the other characters, so she loses a lot of her intimidation factor. Definitely a severe downgrade from the peak monster design of the Twisted Ones. Jessica asks her who she is, and Baby decides to give an exposition dump because I guess she doesn't really have anyone else to talk to about her issues, and she has a lot of issues.
Who are you? I'm Charlie. Do you like my new look? I don't know what you are, but you aren't Charlie. Part of me is. It's strange. I have these memories. I know they don't belong to me, and yet, at the same time, they do. I don't feel anything when they come to mind. They are just there, like walking a long road lined with billboards of things happening somewhere else. Well, what do you feel? I feel disappointment, desperation, a father's disappointment and a daughter's desperation. Henry? No, more brilliant than Henry, though I could only watch from a distance. I see everything clearly now. When you are a little girl, your father is your world. How tragic and miserable such an existence is. To be born with none of your intelligence but all of your heart. To be fully capable of feeling pain and torment but with no power to understand. It opens you up to abuse, to neglect, to unimaginable pain. All you can do is feel. I wanted so desperately to have been the one on that stage, but it was always her. All of his love went to her. You're talking about Afton. William Afton never made anything with love.
Pause it. Never made anything with love, you say? Now that sounds familiar. So obviously Jessica, being a sane person, looks at William and what he's done and thinks there's no way he would ever be capable of love in the way that she understands it. He's a psychopath. But we, the reader, know William better than she does, and we know that he is capable of love, but his version of love is just demented. This enrages Baby because she is obviously insecure about her father not loving her. Not being enough for him has been her motivation this whole time. And William doesn't love her because, as we've seen, he wants what Henry had, and she's just a living reminder of how inferior his creative abilities are to Henry.
She was his obsession. He worked on her day and night, the clown baby with the bright orange pigtails. Petite enough to be sweet and approachable, but large enough to swallow you whole. I wanted to be her, the focus of his attention, the center of his world. You're delusional. You're a robot, not his child. You don't understand yet. One night, I snuck out of bed to see her. I'd been told not to 100 times. I pulled the sheet away and gazed upward, finally able to stare at her as long as I liked without being scolded to stay away. I also remember looking down at the little girl. It's strange seeing through both sets of eyes now. She was gleaming bright, beautiful, standing over me. She had happy red cheeks and a lovely red dress. I stood in awe of this creature my father loved, this daughter he made for himself. I wanted to be her so badly, so I did what I was built to do. My first capture, my first kill.
So it seems like William was building a clown robot version of his rival's daughter that he was obsessed with, which is obviously extremely weird, but it'll make more sense later, kind of. And it ended up capturing / killing his actual human daughter, who he told to stay away from it. We know from the games that William's daughter, Elizabeth, was captured by Circus Baby, who used ice cream to lure her in. Elizabeth in the games was also obsessed with Baby and wanted to play with her despite her father's warnings. So it seems like the book is giving us a very similar version of that story with some obvious differences. We even have her wearing this ice cream shirt, which is a very cool reference. We don't know yet if Baby actually stomach clawed her in the way that happens in the games, but I'm gonna take a wild stab in the dark and say that that probably also happened. As she's monologuing, Jessica unties herself and makes a run for it, but she's stopped by Springtrap, who says that they have plans for her. Since we've already seen William outside of the suit in this book, I'm gonna guess that this is some illusion chip trickery going on here. We cut to Charlie having another dream/flashback, and this time she sees her dad crying, even though he says that he's happy to be there with her. She also sees the fourth closet again and thinks, I have to get inside, as she wakes up. She walks up to the mirror in her room and says to herself that she was on both sides of the door, walking to it and trapped inside of it. As she's kind of reliving this memory and examining it, Marla, Carlton, and John enter the room. They're all happy to see her, especially Carlton, who I'm going to be looking at sideways now for the rest of the book. Marla starts checking up on her vitals and everything, and John shows them all the Ella doll. He tells them to keep their eyes on it as he activates the illusion chip, which makes them sick. So I guess we are still keeping that consistent with the last book, except in the case of Baby for some reason. When the chip is activated, Ella takes on the appearance of a little girl who is definitely Charlie, but for some reason they don't seem to realize that. They just say she looks so real, so they might actually just be stupid. Charlie examines the chip and determines that this one wasn't made by Afton, unlike the ones we saw in the last book. Henry made it, which I think is really cool because it shows us that Henry may not be the moral opposite of William we thought he was. In the last book, we were told that William made these sinister illusion chips and not Henry, which drew a moral distinction between them. William was willing to cross ethical boundaries that he wasn't, but now we're finding out that Henry was willing to do that too. So maybe he's not so different from William, which I think is great character writing. John brings up Charlie's Mimic Head project from college and says that they're still at Jessica's apartment, so they should go retrieve them because he seems to have a plan, only none of them know where Jessica is at the moment. We cut back to Jessica's perspective and she's watching Springtrap dancing around and singing a little song. Of course, what else would she be doing? The illusion cuts out and we finally get the long-awaited Afton reveal, and oh my god, what are we actually doing here, guys? Why is he wearing a purple bathrobe and slippers? Why does he have a cyborg Terminator eye? Why is his bare chest out like that? Put that away, you harlot. Guys, let's be so for real right now, this is the worst William design so far. It has me missing Dave the Twinkie Rick and Morty security guard. This design is fitting though, because as you're about to see, this is also the worst version of William's character so far. He exposition dumps to Jessica. My god, there is just so much exposition dumping in this book and we're just getting started. And he basically just recaps how he was Dave and then he was Springtrap, he always comes back, we know, we get it. Jessica brings up the fake blood that he supposedly left at the scene of his first death, which led Clay to believe that he wasn't dead at the start of the Twisted Ones, but he tells her that he never actually left fake blood, so that's still a mystery that's being teased to us. He also reveals that he's using circus babies to lure and capture new kids, because he can't kidnap anyone in his current state. He says those days are behind him. Yeah, you know, I used to be all about kidnapping kids, it was just my favorite, but those days are behind me. It's just so unserious. It feels like it's making fun of its own ridiculousness. Also, just as a side note, it looks like his robe is switching between blue and purple at random, but I think it's supposed to be a stylistic thing to match with the composition of the backgrounds better. This time I don't actually think it's a mistake. Anyway, we see that he uses illusion tech to make Baby look like the mascot for the restaurant, how we see her in the games. And we also see that she has the same stomach claw things from the games too. William tells Jessica his goal.
How did you create her?
A woman with a mind for science. You can't help but admire what I've done.
I study archaeology, but sure, you believe that.
I can't take complete credit, unfortunately. What you see before you is a combination of all sorts of machinations and magic. Some of it my work, some of it Henry's, who knew not to recreate the illusion of life when your mind can do it for us.
She's more than an illusion, though.
Quite right. But that's why we're here, to discover the secret of that last ingredient, the spark of life. Sometimes great things come at a great cost. We are here to recreate the accident, to replicate older experiments, inching ever closer to immortality.
Is that Freddy? The original Freddy?
Not just the bear, the bird, the fox, the rabbit.
Where did you find these? Why did you melt them together? How is it moving like that?
How are they ever able to move on their own?
The children, their souls were trapped inside those creatures.
What else? You should know this. How did they die?
Inside the suits. Their bodies were bound inside, along with their souls?
Good girl. The spirit follows the flesh, it would seem, and also the pain.
They're still in there? The children! Michael!
If I wish to become my own immortal creation, my body must lead my spirit to its eternal home. Since I am still experimenting, I move my flesh piece by piece, more and more. It is a test of my own will, how much of myself I can carve away and still remain in control.
So we knew from the Silver Eyes that at that point, William was aware that the spirits of the MCI were possessing the animatronics, and that he saw that as a positive thing for them spiritually. But he refers to their possession as an accident here, which means he didn't kill them with that in mind. But now it seems like he's discovered more of the physical science behind it, and that he wants to recreate their possession for himself. He wants to become immortal by possessing this amalgamation of remnant animatronic material with pieces of his own physical body. I'm personally not really a fan of this mad scientist take on William's character because I think it makes him seem less like a depraved child killer and more like a cartoon supervillain. Like he's now saying stuff like, I can't kidnap anyone like this, those days are behind me. Basically, it makes him less scary, and I want my purple guy to be scary. I want him to have the same creepypasta serial killer-esque aura that he had that made my little brother with fear when I showed him Matt Pat's FNAF 2 theory in 2014. And I personally found the Silver Eyes William to be much closer to that than Fourth Closet William, but that's just me. One thing I do like though is his use of the word will in this panel, a test of his own will. It made me appreciate Scott as a writer more because I realized just how perfect of a name William is for this character, not just here but in the games too. His defining trait is that he always comes back, no matter what. He's unkillable, and everything he does to survive is a test of his own willpower. How much can he endure before it kills him? It's a very good name. Before we move on to the next section of the book, we have to talk about this pose that William is hitting here. Strap in because it's time to solve FNAF with art history. In this panel, William is hitting a pose that may seem familiar to you, and it's not a coincidence, because the authors are deliberately referencing a famous painting by Michelangelo called The Creation of Adam, which depicts the Christian biblical story of Genesis, where God gives life to Adam, the first man. It's one of the most famous paintings of all time. The Creation of Man is part of a series of paintings by Michelangelo that depict other biblical stories, and those paintings are all on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Vatican City, which is a city-state surrounded by Rome, Italy. The entire ceiling took Michelangelo 4 years to complete, from 1508 to 1512, and you can still go see it in person today for $66.90. or for free on Google Images. In this painting, God is bringing Adam to life by imbuing him with the spark of life, and Adam is positioned to mirror God because the Bible says that God made us in his image. Adam is naked to represent purity and innocence and all that stuff, but also because Michelangelo, like many other Renaissance artists, was obsessed with the beauty and philosophical importance of the human body, and just human beings in general. He was part of an artistic movement called humanism. In the fourth closet, the illustrators are posing William as Adam, which is very interesting because you would think that he would be an obvious parallel to God, given the fact that he's obsessed with creating life, and he literally says that he's searching for the spark of life. But here he is deliberately posed as Adam and not God. So what is this reference trying to say about his character and the story? Well, it turns out that there is a tiny but significant gap between Adam and God's index fingers in the painting, about 3/4 of an inch to be exact. And some scholars have interpreted that gap to represent the idea that as human beings, we can reach out and get close to divine perfection, but we will never be able to attain it for ourselves. And I think that this pose is foreshadowing the inevitable downfall of William's character in the fourth closet. He's literally trying to play God, to cheat death and become his own immortal creation. by creating and destroying life, which as we know from earlier are two sides of the same coin, and are both part of the natural cycle of the universe. Anyone seeking to control that cycle would be seeking to attain divine perfection, which Michelangelo is showing us to be impossible. William is not God. He is a humble, mortal creation of God. Will William be punished by the end of the story for trying to play God to reach a philosophically impossible goal? A betting man would say yes, and this pose is foreshadowing his fate. But we'll have to wait and see to know for sure. Anyway, art history lesson over. Back to the Funny Bear Game comic book. John and Charlie are discussing her mimic experiment heads from college, which if you remember from a seemingly random detail from that book that derailed the story but never went anywhere, come with an earpiece that allows humans to communicate with them. It basically makes the wearer visible to the robots. John asks Charlie if she'd be able to reverse it to make the wearer invisible to animatronics instead. Charlie says that it may be possible, but she has to go back to bed because she's still readjusting to the post-box life. Carlton tells John that he's not mad about his dad loving him more than his own son anymore, and that he actually wants to help, so he volunteers to go get the heads from Jessica's apartment. He gets there and finds a drawing that Michael made as a kid, which shows 5 missing kids happily gathered around Spring Bonnie. He picks it up and wishes that he could have warned him somehow and saved his life, which may be setting up that this will be Carlton's arc for this story. He finds the heads and confirms that the earpiece works as intended. The heads can only say pronouns, and Carlton points out the fact that they really love pronouns. So this tells us that the mimic heads have been infected with the woke mind virus. Carlton switches the wires around in it to hopefully reverse the effects, but suddenly he's afflicted by the illusion chip ringing, and Baby shows up disguised as Charlie again. So I guess now she does the illusion chip thing, because the writers remembered after having to write the whole scene with the Ella doll. I'm so tired, guys. She actually tricks him for a second, which is astounding considering he just saw Charlie go to sleep before he left, but thankfully he catches on and tries to make up an excuse to get out. But she stops him, and you know what? She stops him and he uses the earpiece to get away. It works. That's all you need to know about this scene. We're just gonna move right along. Back at John's apartment, Charlie wakes up and says, "All I do is sleep now." And that's just so true, girl. You know what? I'm actually gonna say that you being asleep for the vast majority of this book has been one of the main problems with it, because these other side characters are just not nearly as interesting to follow. And it has not felt like a worthwhile writing decision. But it's too late now. We're over halfway done with this book, so just feel free to sleep as much as you want, okay? She reveals to John that she remembers what he told her that night, that he loved her. But of course, he gets all shy and backs down on it, which is honestly kind of cute. Listen, John may not be an interesting protagonist to follow for an entire book, but he does get me sometimes. She also tells him what William said about taking her and not Sammy, and they're both confused about what that could possibly mean. John also tells her that Aunt Jen is dead, and this doesn't really faze Charlie too much, which is honestly not that surprising considering both the relationship that they had and the fact that Charlie's been through so much at this point. Still, she says that they should go back to her house and see if they can find any clues as to what's going on, which now that I think about it is how 90% of the scene transitions in this entire trilogy have worked. Just, hey, we have no idea what's going on. Let's go to this next location and find some clues, but then still be confused afterwards. We cut to Jessica, and she's waking up in some kind of dark, confined space with 4 little kids, who Jessica immediately clocks as the kids who've gone missing recently. One of the kids, Alana, tells her that she has to be quiet or else it will come get her, which is honestly scary as hell. Like, we have no idea what it is. It's definitely not Baby, since the kids know her as the clown girl, and there's just something so unsettling about kids trapped in a dark room being afraid of some hidden monster that's just constantly listening to them. Jessica asks them how they got here, and they all say that they were kidnapped by Baby, some even at different locations than the pizzeria. She tells them that she's dealt with stuff like this before, and her friends will help get them all back home. I really like this scene. I think it's nice how Jessica comforts them, and I like how each kid gets their own subtle characterization through their body language. It just goes a long way to make these otherwise interchangeable minor characters feel a little more real and interesting. We cut to Carlton returning to John's apartment, and it's just Marla left there since John and Charlie left for Aunt Jen's. He tells her that he ran into one of the Charlies, but there's a freaking typo because he says Charlies with a possessive apostrophe. One of the Charlies what? No, it's one of the many plural Charlies. It's not possessive. This book is going to make me crash out. Meanwhile, John and Charlie are on their way to Aunt Jen's, and they finally get to just chat a little bit and have fun together. And it's kind of nice to see them be able to have that moment, even if it's short and in the middle of all this chaos. They arrive, and Charlie says goodbye to Aunt Jen as they pass by her body and go to the back room where the box was found. They start looking through some documents, and John immediately finds a letter from Henry. My dearest Jenny, I've warped and twisted my surroundings to the point where I can never be sure if I'll ever settle into reality again. Even if I did manage to turn off everything planted in the walls made to deceive myself, the damage is done, and far too great. I have my Charlie here with me, though she gives me no joy. I have poured agony into her, made her a reminder not of what I once had, but of the unbearable pain of what was taken from me. Keep all the closets shut. Let them be tombs for my denial and my grievance, especially the fourth closet. Seal it. Bury it. My grief was already beginning to waken me to reality when I began what was to be her final stage. I had no choice but to cease my work, for I was only feeding my own delusion. My old faithful partner, who I can only hope is now in a grave of his own, took what I had begun and made something of his own, something dreadful. I was able to stop him and seal away what he had made. Jenny, you must ensure that the seal remains. Then someday, after many decades have passed and no one remembers, fill the house with every kind of flammable thing and burn it to the ground, standing close guard to put a bullet into anything that emerges from the rubble, no matter what or who it looks like. I'm going to be with my daughter. Love always and to the end, Henry. The word agony here should be ringing all kinds of alarm bells if you've been paying attention, because agony is one of the most important forces in the FNAF universe. We talked about it all the way back towards the beginning of the Silver Eyes, where William described a ghostly aura that seeped out from Freddy's and into the surrounding mall. He was describing the agony of the tragedies that occurred there. It's a common ghost trope where bad stuff happening in a place causes the place to be haunted. So whatever Henry's referring to by his Charlie, which apparently involved illusion tech, is haunted by his pain caused by another tragedy, his daughter's death. Charlie, like us the reader, is confused by this information because he was talking like she died and not Sammy. Her and John then find some of Henry's schematics, which show what seem to be 4 versions of Charlie at different stages in her life, including when she looked like the Ella doll and the adult form that Baby is taking now. Hilariously, John and Charlie look at these schematics and think that he was just building multiple Ella dolls, maybe to give Charlie someone to grow up with after Sammy died, but this is literally the outfit that she's wearing right now. How can they not see what's going on here? While they're looking at the schematics, Baby shows up disguised as Charlie, and now is when the story goes absolutely off the rails. Actually, it's been off the rails for a while now, but it's about to launch itself into orbit. We cut to Carlton and Marla arriving at Circus Babies to rescue Jessica, and they're breaking in and having some banter between them, which I honestly like. I've talked about it before, but having the characters in this kind of teenage horror mystery thriller have chemistry as friends is like the bare minimum, so I'm glad that it's here. They come across these robot clown babies, not Circus Baby herself, but actual baby-sized babies, which I think are supposed to be the Biddy Babs, like from Sister Location. But either way, I think they're pretty cool. They don't see them, which confirms that the earpiece method is working, and Carlton makes a cheeky "these aren't the droids you're looking for" reference as they move to the next area. We cut back to Jessica, and she says that she's gonna go ahead and try to get them out of there and confront the hidden monster that they're afraid of. When she asks the kids to describe it, they say they thought it was a toy, but it's all mangled up. This is such a cool moment because we've been held in suspense not knowing what this hidden monster is gonna be, and as soon as the kid says it's mangled, we the reader who's played the games knows exactly what this is. It may be a hype and aura moment, but it definitely worked on me. So Mangle pops out and he just looks so cool. I love how they illustrated her in this book. but maybe I'm just a sucker for Mangle / Funtime Foxy because he's my favorite animatronic besides maybe Lolbit. That's my top 3 right there, in case anyone was wondering. One of the kids says it's not broken, and for some reason Mangle says yes, which doesn't really make any sense as a response. Like, it wasn't a question, bro. Anyway, Jessica stands up to Mangle and thinks that she scared her away, but he stretches his hand all the way through the vent and snatches Jacob, the kid with the low taper fade. This obviously freaks all the other kids out and they start running away while Jessica calls for them to stick together. We cut back to Carlton and Marla and they're in the mirror maze being stalked by a disembodied voice that says it's getting closer. Carlton smashes his head on the mirror because he's a dum-dum, which makes his earpiece fall out. It turns out that the voice belongs to Funtime Freddy, and just like Mangle, I think he looks really cool in this book. He grabs Carlton, but Marla finds his earpiece and throws it to him, so he puts it on and they both escape Freddy. They run into Jessica and the kids, and Carlton gives Jessica his earpiece so they can escape and he can go look for Jacob. He says he owes it to Michael to not let another kid die, so he's following up on the mini arc that was established a little bit ago. The plan to give Jessica the earpiece is kind of dumb because the kids still don't have any, so it hardly matters if Jessica can be seen or not. It would make more sense for Carlton to keep it since he's heading deeper into the pizzeria by himself, but whatever. Jessica, Marla, and the kids get chased around by Mangle some more. They run into the clown babies and quickly realize that the earpiece plan was indeed dumb because the kids can still be seen. Funtime Foxy also appears out of nowhere on the stage and then transforms like a frickin' transformer into Mangle. So I guess in this book, Mangle can transform into and out of Funtime Foxy mode just whenever, which is cool but doesn't really make much sense. In the games, I always understood Mangle to be a dismantled future version of Funtime Foxy, probably not the same Funtime Foxy we see in Sister Location because she gets torn apart and added to Ennard, but some version of that character. I don't think he was supposed to be a transformer in the games, so this isn't really telling us anything important. Jessica distracts Mangle while Marla gets the kids out. She gets chased around by her and only thinks to put the earpiece on after she escapes, which is really funny. Overall, I actually enjoyed this whole Circus Babies adventure section quite a bit. It was definitely a lot more engaging than climactic animatronic chases toward the end of the last 2 books. It's hard to get across why they work just by summarizing them, because conveying action is one of the strengths of the comic medium, so I definitely recommend reading and experiencing those parts for yourself. We then cut back to John, Charlie, and Baby, and she freaking punches John in the face, but he's tough, so he gets up and says, "Nice hit. But that was just round 1. And then she kisses him and like floods his brain with illusion stuff or something, and he passes out. We then cut back to Carlton, who's following the sound of someone saying hello, who he thinks is Jacob, and as he's following, he repeats to himself that he's not going to let what happened to Michael happen again, just in case we didn't get it the first time, that this is his motivation in the book, guys. Carlton is a character in this book. It turns out that the voice he was following was coming from Funtime Freddy, which is actually super cool because it's the only time we see one of his key abilities from the Sister Location blueprints actually get used, his voice mimic and luring capabilities. So it's cool to see the book exploring that more than the games even do. Back with Charlie and Baby, she shows her a flashback of her childhood, and we see William Afton being a pretty horrible, neglectful, and abusive father. Nothing really surprising there. There's a lot more flashback stuff coming up, but the book keeps cutting back and forth between characters and interrupting it, which is getting kind of annoying. Carlton runs away from Funtime Freddy, and I bet he really wishes he didn't give that earpiece to Jessica for no reason other than that the plot wanted this chase scene to happen. He freaking traps him in the tilt-a-whirl, which was subtly foreshadowed many pages ago when he randomly mentioned it to Baby at Jessica's apartment. We then continue Charlie and Baby's shared flashback, and it's basically the full backstory explanation of Charlie that we've been waiting for the entire series, and it's absolutely fucking insane. The Charlie that we've been following for this entire series is actually a robot that Henry built after the real Charlie, the one we saw in this flashback, was kidnapped and murdered by William Afton. Sammy was just not important to the story at all. He just grew up and got to live a normal life somewhere else. After the real Charlie was killed, Henry went mad with grief and started treating her Ella doll, the only piece of her that she left behind, as if it were really her. And that spiraled out of control and turned into him creating 4 hyper-realistic robot versions of Charlie, one for each stage of her life, so she could grow up like a normal human. They were stored in the 4 closets. All of her memories were stored in the Ella doll so they could be transferred seamlessly between each robot, and the doll was also imbued with Henry's immense grief. So the Charlie we know is a combination of fabricated animatronic memories and Henry's agony. Henry also used illusion technology to help bring the robot Charlies to life, but as Aunt Jen says in the flashback, prolonged exposure to that illusion tech was damaging his brain, making him more and more unwell. She also tells him that he could choose to connect with his real son, Sammy, and his wife and move on from this, but he chooses to throw himself further into madness instead, so he failed to process his grief and come to terms with his trauma, which as we know eventually led to his death. Baby explains that each of the 4 Charlie robots reflected the emotions that Henry was feeling at the time he made them. So the first Charlie was very sad, the second was crazy or desperate or something, and the third, our Charlie, the protagonist, was made when he was just starting to realize that he was going crazy. So maybe that explains why our Charlie so far has been able to fight against her own mental illness and accept help from people close to her in this series, which Henry was never ultimately able to do. And the fourth Charlie, the villain from this book, was made with anger and rage at the height of Henry's insanity, and he hated her because he knew she was wrong, which is why she's now evil. Henry gave up working on her before she was finished, and that's when William stole her and when she clawed his daughter Elizabeth into her stomach. But sometime after that, Henry stole her back and locked her in the 4th closet, which is where she's been all this time until she was freed at the end of the last book. So she's an amalgamation of Charlie's memories, Henry's agony, and Elizabeth's soul. Elizabeth ends this monologue by ripping the Ella doll out of Charlie, just to drive it home that all the stuff she just said is true. So there's a lot to unpack here, obviously. First, this reveal is just ridiculous, and it's been one of the most made fun of things in all of FNAF since the original 4th Closet novel dropped in 2018. A lot of people say that this is one of the most egregious examples of FNAF jumping the shark as a franchise, and yeah, it is. But that honestly doesn't faze me as much, probably just because it's 2026 and we're in a post-Fazgoo world. So I think what actually makes this reveal bad is just that it's so much more convoluted than it needs to be, and it gets dumped on us all at once in a nearly 10-page long monologue. Like, try explaining this reveal to someone who's never heard it before, and they will tell you that what you're saying is literally incomprehensible. So now let's talk about what this means for Charlie's character. We've been keeping track of the 3 methods for dealing with trauma that Clay described in the Twisted Ones, and seeing if Charlie is going to take the first 2 options of avoiding her trauma or being consumed by it, which is what happens to Henry, or if she's going to take the third option of processing it and coming to terms with it. We've also seen, especially at the end of the Twisted Ones, that Charlie is being deprived of the ability to even make that choice for herself, and learning that she's not even a real person, she's just a robot copy of a dead little girl, is the ultimate loss of autonomy for her, because now it doesn't even matter what choice she makes because she isn't even real. Even though her backstory's been fully revealed, the book still isn't over quite yet, so we'll see if learning this about herself affects her resolve to keep fighting for closure. The other thing to note about this is what it tells us about Henry's character, because of all the emotions Elizabeth named when describing how he made all of the Charlies, one that she never named was love, or any positive emotion for that matter. So we're now seeing even more how Henry is not the opposite of William. It's not a simple thing of Henry makes things with regular love and William makes things with twisted love because he's the evil one, even if William himself may sort of see it that way. No, they're both twisted. They both express love in extremely diluted ways, and they're more similar to each other than not. I think that this is a core fundamental part of Henry's character that needs to be understood, not just in the books, but in the games too. Let's move on to the ending of another major story arc, which ends up being Carlton's, of all people. He makes it to William's experiment room and he finds Jacob cowering in the corner. He's pointing at the MCI amalgamation, saying that he hurt so bad and he needs Carlton to save him too. Carlton walks up to it and realizes that Michael is in there. William shows up and explains to Carlton how heat is the key to manipulating remnant, or pixie dust as he calls it. Pixie dust is a magical substance from fairy tales like Peter Pan that allows things to fly. but it's a term that's used pretty commonly just to describe small amounts of magic. He injects remnant from the amalgamation into Carlton for some reason. He says it'll be an interesting experiment, but really the book just needed a way for Carlton to communicate with the MCI ghosts. We cut back to Elizabeth and Charlie, and Elizabeth is still monologuing to her as she bleeds out on the floor with a literal hole in her stomach. She basically says that even though she returned to William after being set free in the Twisted Ones, she's still not enough for him because he can't duplicate what happened to her. And so that's why they need to get our Charlie, because she still has a piece of Henry in her. I don't know, guys, just go with it. We cut back to Carlton, and he has entered the spiritual plane and is finally reunited with Michael's ghost, who asks him to pass him a green marker because he's working on some kind of drawing project with pieces of paper scattered all over the place. Carlton asks him what he's doing, and he says that he's putting his friends back together because they're all in pieces. He shows Carlton a familiar drawing, the one of all 5 missing children with Spring Bonnie. But wait a second, there's a 6th kid on a separate piece of paper that's ripped in half. So, is this 6th kid supposed to be Bite Victim because he's separate from the other ones and literally broken, and the kid possessing Golden Freddy has to put him and all the other kids back together? I have no idea. What I do know is that put back together being used here is far from a coincidence. It's what the Fredbear plush says to Bite Victim at the end of FNAF 4. Because of how all the kids' spirits get released in Happiest Day along with Bite Victim, it's fair to say that whoever the Fredbear plush is referring to all of the missing kids being put back together, which is what Michael Brooks is doing here. He's putting all of his friends back together. But the thing is that we only see 5 kids total. Michael, Cassidy, Fritz, Gabriel, and Susie. So I have no idea what this 6th child is. Maybe it's Carlton since he just arrived, but why is he ripped in half? I really don't have a clue. Let me know if you guys think that this means anything. Anyway, we see that what's scattering the kids' souls in this circumstance is William, who they still see as their friend, Spring Bonnie, extracting their remnant and splitting it across the fun times, which is probably not what the Fredbear plush is referring to in FNAF 4. So this is a similar concept of being put back together, but definitely different. Carlton sees what's happening and says he can help Michael out. We cut back to the Charlies and they're straight up duking it out now. It's a climactic final battle. Charlie hits the sit-ups line again, which is pretty funny, and she runs into the closet where Henry's murder endoskeleton is hiding, the one he used to do what he did. John wakes up and Elizabeth disguises herself as Charlie in order to trick him, and she says this, which is absolutely wild. But Charlie says,
"You were right, Elizabeth. I was never supposed to be here. Neither of us were!"
And uses the endoskeleton to stab Elizabeth, the Ella doll, and herself all in one go. And as she's dying, she thinks to herself,
"I love you too, John."
So at first glance, this looks like Charlie is succumbing to the same exact fate as her father. She's being killed by the same robot. It's definitely supposed to be a parallel, but there's key differences that show us that this is different from how Henry died. First, the last thing Charlie says is that Elizabeth was right about her never supposed to be there. She's accepting that her existence is wrong and that she's not normal. So unlike the end of the last book where she wasn't given the opportunity to choose how she wanted to move forward with her life, she's choosing here to accept what she's learned about herself. She also allows herself to love John back because unlike Henry, she's allowing herself to love and be loved by the people in her life, which is a key part of coming to terms with her trauma and learning to live with it. So even though she dies here, she isn't defeated. She didn't take the wrong path. She took the right one, the third option. We cut back to Carlton one last time, and he's successfully bringing all the kids back together. And as they come back, the Funtime creations become depossessed. William is about to kill Jacob and start using him for his experiments, and he commands Mangle to bring him. From Carlton's perspective, we see that Mangle is doing this because she's partially possessed by Susie, and Susie just thinks that she's helping her friend. So Carlton draws a scary picture of Spring Bonnie and tells them that he's not their friend, he's the bad man who hurt them, and that he's about to hurt someone else. This seems to work, as the illusion of Bonnie starts fading away to reveal William's true form underneath. You're very familiar with this exact sequence of events if you've seen the FNAF movie, and like I said earlier, I think the Silver Eyes trilogy was Scott's first attempt at telling a narrative-driven version of the FNAF story as he envisioned it, and I think there were a lot of ideas that he was very set on that ended up making it into his second pass at it in the movies. I personally think the idea of using drawings to communicate with ghost children and turn them against their killer goes hard, so I'm happy that Scott has stuck with it. There are some other ideas from the books, however, that I'm praying he doesn't stick with for the third movie. Anyway, the MCI amalgamation stands up, grabs William, and throws him into the furnace, which is extremely hype and aura moments. And as far as we know from this trilogy of novels, this is the end of William Afton. So as foreshadowed by the creation of Adam Pose, he was punished for trying to play God, and it's very fitting that his punishment came by way of fire. Fire has obvious symbolism in the Christian interpretation as hell, which is also where William gets condemned to in the games. But it also ties back to another running theme in these books, the false dichotomy of creation and destruction. William used fire to melt down Remnant and make it malleable, so that he could imbue his new creations with a spark of life. But as we just saw, the Remnant was taken from the final resting place of dead children whose lives he destroyed. Now he's being destroyed by that same fire. So the book is once again showing us that creation and destruction are two sides of the same coin, and fire is being used to represent that here. Speaking of overt Christian imagery, Michael says goodbye to Carlton, and he and the other kids literally pass through the pearly gates of heaven. So yes, Mike Schmidt from the movies, the MCI indeed have gone to heaven. The image of the pearly gates of heaven originates from the Bible, which describes the 12 gates to New Jerusalem. Basically the capital city of heaven, but don't quote me on that, I was raised in a militant atheist household, as being made out of giant pearls. In popular culture, the image has come to just generally represent the entrance to heaven. So in the fourth closet, being put back together means that the kids are free from their purgatorial prison and able to move on to the afterlife. I think that this is strongly implied to be the case in the games as well, even though we don't see any pearly gates. As Michael is leaving, he gives Carlton a drawing and tells him to keep it. Carlton says that he should keep it because it's a part of him, but Michael tells him that he'll die without it, and that he can give it to him the next time he sees him, which probably means when he dies too. I actually think this is really sweet, and I'm very happy that Carlton was actually given something to do besides being a generic secondary character in this book. I just really wish that it got started sooner. As much as Carlton can be annoying, I would honestly have much rather followed an extended plot of him communing with the MCI spirits and working through his own guilt than the not Charlie plot. Just keeping it real here. We then cut to the epilogue, which is really more of a final chapter than an epilogue. The whole gang minus Charlie meets in the hospital ward where Carlton's being treated for his injuries. Marla's asking him about what happened, but he's keeping it to himself, which I think is sweet. Carlton asks Jessica if she managed to get all of the kids out, and she says yes, they're all safe and sound. Clay tells them that he's been looking for Charlie, but has had no luck yet. John is looking guilty here because he hasn't told any of them that Charlie's dead, probably because he wants to let them all live in hope while he processes it. Carlton asks if he knows where not Charlie is, and Marla elbows him, which again, I know is supposed to be funny and charming, but it's even less of those things than the first time. Thank you, the fourth closet, for reminding me of one of your worst moments right before the end. We then get the final scene of the Silver Eyes graphic novel trilogy. John goes to the cemetery, the same one from the end of the first book, and kicks himself for how he backed down from telling Charlie that he loves her. He walks up to two graves, presumably Henry's and the real Charlie's. And suddenly, he sees a woman who looks like a slightly older version of Charlie under the tree, but her face is obscured, so we don't know for sure. She stretches her hand out to him, and we see in the final panel that he takes her hand and walks away with her, leaving the real Charlie's grave behind, which reads 1980 to 1983. This ending is purposefully vague, and it's hard to figure out exactly what's going on, but we can use our comprehensive knowledge of this trilogy's themes that we've kept close track of to understand what this ending means. Earlier, when Charlie killed Elizabeth and went down with her, we determined that she was finally taking the the third of Clay's 3 options for dealing with trauma. She wasn't running from her past, and she wasn't letting it destroy her. She was accepting it for what it was and opening herself up to being loved for who she is, despite it. So even though she died, she still demonstrated positive growth for her character. John also demonstrated positive growth by refusing to give up on Charlie despite how badly he wanted to move on, to put it all in his past. He could have just never met Not Charlie at Carlton's house and not gotten involved, like he was thinking about at the start of the book. He could have thrown away Theodore and moved on from Charlie entirely, but instead, he faced his pain and chose to find her again. This ending is just showing us that Charlie and John made the right choice, and they both get to be happy. The logistics of how Charlie survived aren't really important. She could have possessed Elizabeth's body, they could have merged together, maybe Henry made a secret 5th Charlie robot, why not at this point? The point is that Charlie is alive and she gets to live the rest of her life making her own choices. Her trauma will still always be there, it will always be part of her, but she was able to accept that fact and carry on living a normal life. She's a real person. She's not defined by Henry or William or anyone else. Her life is in her hands now. And that is the end of the 4th Closet, the graphic novel, and the end of the Five Nights at Freddy's graphic novel trilogy. I think we've talked about the elements that make up these books, the narrative, the characters, the themes, the artwork, the use of the visual medium, extensively enough, and there's not much I have left to say about those for a conclusion. Instead, I'll just give you my general thoughts on these graphic novels as a whole, complete product. I think that if you're a fan of FNAF and you like the games and want to get into the books but don't consider yourself to be much of a reader, you should definitely read these. They have flaws, which we've talked about, but I think that they're well worth reading if you're a fan of the series. You will probably get some level of enjoyment out of them. If you're not a fan of FNAF, then you're not listening to this right now because we're at the tail end of a massive long slop video essay about the books. But I still would not recommend reading these because they're not great standalone pieces of work. I think you need to enjoy them within the context of the whole FNAF extended media universe. There's a lot of errors in these books, which tells me that they didn't go through enough rounds of editing before being published, and I think that just comes down to laziness. It's fun to analyze them as if they were highbrow literature, but in reality these books exist to fill shelves at Barnes & Noble. They're meant for grandmas and grandpas to buy their grandkids whose interests they only have vague notions of. But at the end of the day, I think those grandkids will be satisfied with these books. They aren't terrible, especially for fans. While writing the script, I was trying to rank the 3 entries in the series from worst to best, but I was having such a difficult time because they're all hovering around a very similar level of quality, mid, and they're all worse than each other for different reasons. The worst thing about the Silver Eyes is easily the artwork. I was being nicer to it at the beginning of this script, but having seen everything side by side and compared, it is truly garbage. That alone probably ranks it lowest. I will say though that the best thing about it was that its story was relatively simple and easy to follow, even if almost all the characters were painfully dull, except Dave, who actually carried the book for me. The worst thing about the Twisted Ones was how boring it was. Like, it just took so long to actually get going. And I hated how Charlie lying for no reason kept extending out the story longer than it needed to be. But I did really enjoy the artwork and the dynamics between certain characters. Also, this book had the most consistent and well fleshed out themes, and the best monster design by a long shot. With all of that taken into account, I think the Twisted Ones is the best in the trilogy. The worst thing about the 4th Closet was also how boring it was, and it was boring for much the same reason as the Twisted Ones. It just took forever to get going and the plot was very frustrating. It did, however, carry over the high quality of artwork, themes, and interesting character dynamics from that book, and it did have a fun third act at Circus Babies. Of course, the 4 robots twist was chopped, but I did like the ending, so the 4th Closet ranks second overall. And that's it. That is my complete comprehensive summary and analysis of the Five Nights at Freddy's graphic novel trilogy. I really hope you guys enjoyed. This is by far the hardest video I've had to make so far. Probably one of the longest things I've ever had to write just in my life in general, but it was really fun to do. I would love to do more FNAF graphic novel analysis, so if you'd like to see me cover the Fazbear Frights graphic novelizations in the future, please leave a like on the video. And if we get 1,000 likes, I'll do it. Also, please subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss the next video or stream, and please leave a comment on this video to let me know your thoughts on these books. I can't wait to hear them. That's all for now, guys, and as always, thank you for calling 808 Freddy's. I helped him create. I helped him create. I helped him create. I helped him create. What is he, the Joker?
How do we get out?
It's like,
No?
It's like, how do we get out? Because she's
Okay.
asking him. She's demanding he tells.
How do we get out? Or no, let me do it again.
The spirits will awaken. The spirits will awaken. Wait, one more.
John. John. No!
Wrong again. I've accepted. Why does it sound like Trump?
Wrong again.
You never know when a corpse may wander out of the shadows wearing a rabbit suit. Wearing a rabbit suit. Wearing a rabbit suit.
Secrets petrify you. You harden yourself against the world to keep... Like, how the fuck do I do it?
She's like crazy, like...
Oh, okay.